Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Annie Lee. Annie Lee was born on July 3, 1985, in San Jose, California, to Vivian Van Lee and Hogan Lee, Vietnamese immigrants. As an only child, Annie demonstrated exceptional intelligence and talent from an early age, consistently excelling in her studies and being considered the top student in her school. Annie's favorite subjects were chemistry and biology. Her teachers believed she had a bright future in science, with some even predicting she might one day win a Nobel Prize. Throughout her school years, Annie actively participated in scientific conferences, where her work garnered various awards and recognition. As a high school student, she secured a $65,000 scholarship to study at any U.S. university. Annie chose the University of Rochester in New York, where she studied cellular development biology and medical anthropology. She later enrolled in Yale University's graduate school, working in a scientific laboratory and pursuing a doctoral degree in chemistry and biology. Annie's dissertation focused on the study of diseases caused by metabolic disorders. During her time working in the laboratory, she gained much research knowledge, which contributed to the treatment of diabetes and certain types of cancer. Annie, a student at the University of Rochester in New York, while pursuing her studies, met Jonathan Widawsky, a fellow student and promising scientist. The two quickly dating, and their parents were pleased with their relationship. After graduating, Annie moved to New Haven, Connecticut, to attend Yale, while Jonathan chose to pursue his studies at Columbia University in New York. Despite the distance, the couple maintained their romance, visiting each other every weekend and making plans for their future. In the summer of 2009, Jonathan proposed to Annie with a beautiful diamond ring, and she happily accepted. They set their wedding date for Sunday, September 13, 2009. Initially, they only shared the news with their parents and close friends, keeping their colleagues in the dark. It wasn't until a week before the wedding, on September 6, that Annie sent out emails to friends and colleagues, announcing their upcoming marriage and a wedding invitation. The day after, the news spread rapidly throughout the department and the lab where Annie worked, becoming the most discussed topic. Annie and her fiancé had planned a wedding ceremony on Long Island, followed by a honeymoon at a luxurious resort in Greece. A few months before she went missing, Annie had written an article for the university publication, where she cautioned students about potential dangers and provided safety tips for when they were off campus. However, despite being aware of the risks, Annie herself fell victim to an unexpected tragedy at her workplace. On Tuesday, September 8, Annie left her university dormitory, where she shared a room with 3 friends, and headed to the University Medical Center laboratory, where she worked. The laboratory building, located on Amistad Street, has restricted access and requires a pass and special key card for entry and movement within the premises. A CCTV camera at the entrance captured Annie entering the building around 10 o'clock that morning. She went to her office, changed her clothes, stored her personal belongings, put on a medical coat, locked the door, and proceeded to the biolab. However, Annie never returned to her office that day and seemed to vanish in the corridors. Unfortunately, no one ever saw her alive again. On the evening Annie went missing, her dormitory neighbors were the first to discover the incident. They had grown accustomed to Annie's punctual nature, as she usually returned home at the same time every day. However, as midnight approached and she failed to return, her friends began to worry. Their concerns deepened when they were unable to reach Annie on her phone. Deciding to take action, they reported her disappearance to the police. Upon investigation, it was discovered that Annie's parents and fiancé had also been unable to contact her that night. Initially, they had assumed she was working late due to her heavy workload and would call them back when she was available. When the police arrived, they weren't too worried. They had heard what had happened and assumed that Annie was nervous before the wedding and needed time to calm down. However, their opinion quickly changed after examining Annie's office and reviewing the CCTV footage. They also tracked her movements within the building using her key card. The evidence revealed that Annie had entered the building in the morning but never exited. Her personal belongings, including her clothes, bag, wallet, and cell phone, were still in her office. Despite an extensive search, no sign of Annie was found, leaving behind only the unsettling feeling that she had vanished into thin. The disappearance of Annie Lee, a graduate student, led to an extensive investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Those who knew Annie personally described her as intelligent, kind, cheerful, and energetic, with no known enemies. Her family and fiancé anxiously waited for news, hope she will return safely. However, detectives were less optimistic, concluding that it was likely she was no longer alive. The laboratory building, crime scene, was placed under guard, and the list of suspects was narrowed down to staff and students with authorized access. The university atmosphere was tense because everyone realized that the killer might be somewhere nearby. Annie's fiancé, Jonathan, who had flown in from another state, was questioned but had a solid alibi. Despite this, he was visibly shaken and on the verge of a nervous breakdown, deeply concerned about Annie's disappearance. Among the suspects, one is Annie's teacher. On the day she disappeared, he canceled his lectures for unknown reasons and had no alibi. Although his was initially questioned, after the police still believed the perpetrator was likely someone from Yale University's laboratory, either a student, faculty member, or staff. A disturbing detect was found on September 12, providing the first evidence that Annie was no longer alive. A medical coat stained with blood was discovered hidden behind a false ceiling in an auxiliary room of a building. The coat did not belong to Annie, but further examination revealed that the blood on it was indeed hers. On September 13, the body Annie was found in a narrow pipeline on the technical floor of the laboratory. The day she was supposed to get married and leave for her honeymoon in Greece. Her petite stature and fragile build made it easier for her killer to stuff her body into the small space. A service dog's keen sense of smell helped the police locate Annie's body. The location where her body was hidden suggested that the killer was familiar with the laboratory's layout. It was a spot that was hard to access, making it a clever yet sinister choice for concealing the crime. Annie's body showed severe signs of trauma. Most of her ribs were broken, her limbs were damaged, and several teeth were knocked out. However, according to the pathologists, the cause of death was mechanical asphyxia, which meant that Annie was severely beaten and then strangled. A further examination revealed that Annie's clothes had traces of seminal fluid. But it was concluded that she had not been raped. A few days before Annie's body was discovered, police attention was initially drawn to Raymond J. Clark III, a young laboratory technician. Raymond claimed to have seen Annie leave the building without her belongings, implying she intended to return. However, his testimony aroused suspicion from the police. Following the discovery of Annie's body, Raymond became the primary suspect. They collected DNA samples from Raymond and asked him not to leave the country until the investigation was completed. On September 17, Raymond was arrested. Forensic examination results showed that his semen was found on Annie's clothes. And his robe, stained with Annie's blood, was discovered hidden in the suspended ceiling. Additionally, Raymond had suspicious bruises on his body, suggesting that Annie had fiercely defended herself before her death. Despite the incriminating evidence, Raymond denied any involvement in the crime. Further investigation showed that Raymond was a very hot-tempered person, easily angered and often had workplace conflicts. He frequently engaged in verbal altercations with colleagues and had a reputation for being cruel, having physically abused women he had relationships with in the past. Raymond did not excel academically, but he stood out as a promising athlete in school. He is known for his handsome looks, and has a strong appeal to women. However, he was unable to get into university due to poor grades. Fortunately, with the help of some relatives, Raymond secured a job at a laboratory, starting as a janitor and eventually working his way up to become a technician. During this time, Raymond was in a relationship with a woman named Jessica Del Rocco. However, their relationship was tumultuous, and Jessica later testified against Raymond in court. She described him as controlling, stating that he would constantly monitor her activities, read her messages, and dictate what she could do and couldn't do. He would also become violent when they disagreed. And Jessica claimed that he would physically abuse her. After one particularly brutal incident, Jessica fled from Raymond. She temporarily relocated to another state to escape his abuse. Then Raymond had been in a relationship with Jennifer Radko, a Yale University student, for the past year. Jennifer ignored rumors about his alleged infidelity with students and lab employees. She accepted his marriage proposal, and they proceeding with wedding preparations. The motive behind the murder remains unclear, even after he fully admitted his guilt. He never revealed his motive, even after admitting to the crime. Initially, it was thought that the murder was related to a workplace conflict. Annie was conducting experiments on laboratory mice to study the effectiveness of enzymes in treating cancer, diabetes, and other diseases. Raymond, who considered the laboratory his domain, was in charge of the mice. Two theories emerged about the incident leading to the murder. The first theory suggests that Raymond might have had a conflict with Annie. On the day of the murder, Annie stayed late in the laboratory and entered the area where experimental animals were kept. Raymond, who had cleaned the area, go in there too. The confrontation could have intensified into a physical altercation, which in turn could have led to Annie being strangled by their Raymond a fit of rage. A second theory proposes that Raymond had feelings for Annie, but she rejected his advances. Raymond, unaccustomed to rejection, was hurt by her refusal. When he learned about her upcoming wedding on September 7th, Raymond was completely overcome by intense feelings of jealousy. The next day, when he was alone with Annie in the laboratory, he attacked her, beating and attempting to rape her, then ultimately strangling her. This theory explains the appearance of seminal fluid on Annie's clothes. The case gained widespread media attention from the start. The victim was a promising young scientist, and the crime was committed on campus. Raymond first appeared in court in Connecticut on October 6, 2009, where he denied any involvement in the murder and the charges against him. The hearing was postponed multiple times to allow for the collection of all evidence and materials. It was discovered that Raymond had spent at least an hour with Annie in the laboratory, during which the murder took place. In an attempt to mislead investigators, Raymond used his key card over 50 times at various locations, eventually making his way to the technical floor. There, he spent around 15 minutes hiding the body in the wall. Raymond then activated the fire alarm, which forced the staff to evacuate the building, providing him with an opportunity to blend in and avoid suspicion. A crucial piece of evidence was discovered in the pocket of a robe found hidden under a false ceiling, a green ballpoint pen. Further examination revealed that Raymond had used this pen to sign his name in various work logs on the same day. Additionally, witnesses reported seeing Raymond scrubbing specific areas of the lab floor repeatedly over the next few days. Despite the floor appearing clean, he also disposed of the cleaning equipment and a pack of tissues with small brown stains, resembling blood splatters, in a trash can. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the tissues contained Annie's blood, indicating that Raymond had made a thorough attempt to eliminate any evidence. In February 2011, Clark agreed to a plea deal in exchange for a reduced sentence. At the court hearing on March 17, 2011, he pleaded guilty to murder and attempted rape and apologized to Tanny's parents and fiancé. However, Raymond never revealed the details of the incident leading up to the murder or his motivation for the crime. As a result, he was sentenced to 44 years in prison. Raymond is currently serving his sentence at the Cheshire Correctional Institution in New Haven County, Connecticut, and will not be eligible for release until September 2053. The parents and fiancé of Annie have expressed that they find the given sentence to be fair. At the sentencing, Annie's mother delivered a heartfelt speech. With tears in her eyes, she expressed that she would never get the opportunity to hold her daughter again, witness her marriage, hear her laughter, or enjoy the presence of her grandchildren. She said goodbye to her child, whom she cherished as the greatest gift from God. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kelly Clayton. Kelly Clayton, also known as Kelly Stage Clayton, resides in Cotton, New York. Kelly Clayton had a promising life ahead of her. In high school, she was an exemplary student, excelling academically and serving as a role model for her peers. Her academic achievements were impressive, and she passed exams with ease. Despite her academic focus, Kelly's appearance was often described as model-like, and she could have pursued a career in modeling if she had chosen to do so. Following high school, Kelly enrolled in a teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, which brought immense pride to her parents. However, after a few years, Kelly suddenly lost interest in her studies. It is unclear what triggered this change, but she eventually withdrew from the university and informed her parents that she no longer wanted to pursue a teaching career. Kelly felt that she was too young to be confined to a life of grading notebooks and managing classrooms. Instead, she expressed a desire to travel and experience life to the fullest. Her parents were disappointed and upset by her decision, leading to a 6-month estrangement from their daughter. Kelly's life took an unexpected turn when she met Tom Clayton at a party hosted by mutual friends. Tom was immediately smitten with Kelly and began showering her with attention. His athletic physique and attractive appearance made him a standout, which wasn't surprising given his successful hockey career. As a semi-professional player for the Jackal team, Tom was known for his strength and aggression on the ice. However, he realized his hockey career would eventually end due to physical limitations. Tom would have to retire and enjoy the game from the sidelines, either by attending live matches or watching his favorite team on television. They continued with their lives, starting by returning to New York to get married. They then moved to North Carolina and eventually settled in the small town of Cato, which had only a few thousand residents. Tom started a franchise that specialized in rebuilding houses damaged by fires or disasters. He also worked for a friend's company in a related field. Kelly, on the other hand, had dropped out of university and was working as a waitress. Although she changed jobs, she continued to work even after having 2 children. Tom's income was sufficient for the family, and Kelly could have quit her job to care for their daughters, but she chose to continue working to earn extra money. She used this extra income to buy toys and pamper her children. On September 28, 2015, Tom went to play poker with his friends, the Millers, as he usually did. He preferred to attend these gatherings alone, as playing for money required a certain level of skill and experience. Additionally, someone had to stay home with the children, and bringing the whole family would have turned the evening into a noisy and chaotic affair, detracting from the enjoyment of the game. That evening, Tom was on a losing streak, but instead of giving up, he tried to win back his losses. He suggested that anyone who wanted to stay and play until morning was welcome to do so, but no one took him up on the offer, and he ended up going home. At home, a horrific scene unfolded before Tom's eyes. His wife lay in a pool of her own blood, severely beaten and, at first glance, appeared lifeless. Panicked, Tom frantically searched the rooms for his children. Fortunately, they were unharmed but terrified. He quickly scooped up his daughters and rushed to his neighbor Derek's house, desperate to shield them from the gruesome sight of their mother's battered body. From Derek's house, Tom called the police, struggling to process the chaos. The officer who arrived at the scene found Tom kneeling beside his wife's body, attempting to administer CPR. However, the emergency medical technicians soon intervened and pulled Tom away, revealing the devastating truth: Kelly had been deceased for an extended period, and nothing could be done to revive her. The house was in disarray, with blood covering both floors. The bedroom showed signs of an intense struggle between Kelly and her killer, who carried out the brutal act despite the presence of children in the house. It appeared Kelly had been pushed down the stairs, as evidenced by the broken banister, and brutally beaten with a blunt object until the killer was certain she was dead. No signs of knife or gunshot wounds were found. The officer filming the crime scene observed that Tom seemed lost and in shock. He wandered aimlessly, briefly entering the room before exiting, and was unable to provide the officer with basic information, such as the location of the children's room or the emergency exit. However, when asked about his whereabouts during the murder, Tom calmly stated he had spent the evening at a friend's house playing poker. The officer, failing to obtain clear information from Tom, proceeded to question the neighbor and the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, described the perpetrator as a robber. According to Charlie, she and her sister were drifting off to sleep when they heard their mother scream loudly from the next room. Their mother yelled, "Charlie, run away from here," and then the whole house shook violently. They cautiously left their room and saw the perpetrator leaning over their mother, beating her with what looked like a hammer. They ran back into the nursery, blocked the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. Fortunately, the perpetrator wasn't looking for them, as the nightstand wouldn't have been enough to stop him. When asked to describe the perpetrator, Charlie said he was big, like a bear. He wore blue jeans, a black shirt, and a mask similar to the one her father wears when hunting. Charlie also noted that the perpetrator's eyes looked like her father's, but she didn't remember anything else, as she only caught a brief glimpse before getting scared and running away. Police officers investigating the house couldn't find evidence to support her claim that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at the front or back doors, but the garage gate was open, which could have been an entry point. However, nothing was stolen from the house, including jewelry and cash, and the cabinets were all closed. This was unusual, as burglars typically search every area. Officers quickly suspected that Tom was involved in the murder. They believed he was pretending to be a grieving husband and had actually killed his wife to collect insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, Tom could potentially receive up to $1 million. The police just needed to gather evidence to solve the case, especially since the daughter mentioned that the perpetrator's mask and eyes resembled her father's. However, the police couldn't find the hunting mask in the house. After discovering Tom's whereabouts on the night in question, the police interviewed the other poker players. One of Tom's friends was incredulous. "You think Tom is the killer? That's unbelievable. His wife was just murdered, and instead of finding the real culprit, you're focusing on him." Another friend, less emotional, chimed in, "Tom couldn't have done it. He worked 2 jobs non-stop because he loved Kelly and their kids. It's just not possible. Besides, he was with us the entire night, playing poker. Even when everyone else was tired, he wanted to keep playing." Laura, an acquaintance of Tom's, shared her concerns during a break in the game. She recalled that Tom had asked to borrow her phone, claiming he had left his in the car, which was only 10 meters away. Laura found this odd but lent him her phone anyway. Tom stepped outside to make the call, but when Laura checked her phone's call history later, there was no record of the call, suggesting that Tom had deleted it. Laura discussed this incident with her husband, who had been sitting next to Tom at the poker table. He noticed that Tom wasn't paying attention to the game, instead keeping his head down, focusing on something on the table. It turned out that Tom had his phone with him the whole time, which raised more questions. Why did Tom borrow Laura's phone if he had his own? Who was he trying to call, and why couldn't he use his own phone? After Laura's testimony, the police re-questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and she reiterated that the robber resembled her father. The next testimony came from the niece of Kelly. She explained that she hadn't told her Aunt Kelly about Tom's true nature because she didn't want to upset Kelly. Aunt Kelly adored Tom. The niece felt her truth wasn't needed, implying that it wouldn't change anything. The niece saw Tom as a person with two sides. On the surface, he appeared caring and attentive, often showering Aunt Kelly with attention and gifts, and even helping with childcare, which is more than many fathers do. However, his behavior at work revealed a completely different personality. Recognizing her niece's concerns about being young and alone, Aunt Kelly had set up a job for her with Tom the previous summer. During her employment, the niece handled tasks such as correspondence, registration, and managing documents. At first, her interactions with Tom were strictly professional, mainly because she didn't know him well before working for him. One day, Tom got drunk and came to the office, revealing to the niece that his family life was a facade. He confessed to loving his daughters, but not his wife, Aunt Kelly. He had been unfaithful, having multiple affairs during their marriage, and considered leaving her but stayed due to financial concerns. It was later also confirmed by female participants of a poker game that Tom was indeed unfaithful, having relationships with two women present at the game. Additionally, Kelly's 16-year-old niece shared information about Michael Beard, another employee of Tom's firm. Michael was doing repair work on houses after a fire, but there were frequent reports of items going missing from the houses where he worked. Tom initially doubted his customers when they accused Michael Beard of theft during fire restoration jobs. However, as the complaints continued, it became clear that Michael was indeed stealing from clients. Additionally, there were allegations of Michael showing up to work intoxicated. When Tom finally confronted Michael about his behavior, he was understandably upset and disappointed. Despite having every right to be angry, Tom took a surprisingly compassionate approach. Instead of simply firing Michael and cutting ties, Tom actively reached out to other companies and recommended Michael for a job. When none of those opportunities panned out, Tom took it a step further and offered Michael work around his own house, doing odd jobs like cutting the grass, watering plants, and making minor repairs. This decision showed that Tom was willing to give Michael a second chance, even if it meant finding alternative employment for his former employee. The detective brought Michael Beard in for questioning. Michael claimed he only stole because he and his family were in dire need of money. He expressed his gratitude towards Tom, his former employer, who had always defended him. Michael also praised Tom's wife, who had shown kindness by feeding him and giving his children old clothes. However, the investigation took a turn when Michael's wife, Holly, was interrogated. She revealed that Tom had offered Michael a job, which Michael had not mentioned earlier, and promised to pay him $10,000 for it. This new information raised suspicions about Michael's alibi. He was called back to the station and hooked up to a lie detector. The test results indicated that Michael was lying, and he eventually cracked under pressure and began to confess. The investigation was sparked by the death of Kelly, which had shaken Michael. He had even attended church to pray for her soul, showing that he was genuinely distraught by her passing. Despite initial doubts about his involvement, the police had released him after the first round of questioning. However, Holly's testimony changed everything. Tom promised Michael $10,000 to kill his wife, Kelly, and make it look like an accident. The plan was for Michael to sneak into the house while Tom was playing poker, strangle Kelly, and then start a fire to cover up the crime. The house was insured for a large sum of money. Michael found 2 cans of gasoline waiting for him in the garage, which he would use to set the fire. He quietly entered the house while everyone was asleep. He crept upstairs to Kelly's bedroom, but she was either awake or woken by the sound of the door. She saw Michael and began screaming. Kelly's screaming startled Michael, and he tried to strangle her. However, Kelly was stronger than she appeared and fought back. A fierce struggle ensued, moving from the bedroom to the kitchen. Michael was surprised by Kelly's strength, which made the fight much more intense than he had anticipated. Michael was in a state of shock and panic, flailing his arms wildly and grabbing at Kelly's clothes, unable to focus on the fight. In contrast, Kelly was fighting for her life, accurately aiming her blows at Michael's face. If the police had arrived at Michael's location sooner, they would have seen evidence of the beating he had taken. After a prolonged struggle, Michael slammed Kelly's head into the wall with great force, knocking her to the ground. She was unable to get up for some time. Michael then produced a hammer and continued to strike Kelly's head until she showed no signs of life. Consumed by rage and panic, Michael fled the house, forgetting that Tom had instructed him not only to kill Kelly but also to set fire to the house to conceal the crime. Mark Blandford, Michael's accomplice, was just the driver. Knowing Michael from working together and staying with him, Mark had not been surprised when Michael, known for petty theft, had asked him to drive during a break-in. Mark had mentioned that he had initially wanted to decline Michael's request, but that the offer of $500 had been tempting. After some deliberation, Michael had convinced him to participate. Michael's plan had been to rob a businessman, and he had needed Mark's assistance to make a quick getaway before the police arrived. Michael had also promised to help with the car. Mark had eventually agreed, but only on the condition that he could park the car at a safe distance from the house. Michael had accepted this condition. That evening, Mark had waited for Michael in the car in a dark alley, and Michael had come back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling him to move as fast as possible. Michael hadn't had any bag or sack on him, which hadn't looked much like a robbery. Mark hadn't asked him any questions along the way, simply because he hadn't wanted to know anything. He had just wanted his $500, which he hadn't ended up getting. On the way out, Michael had asked Mark to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of there. Mark had stopped there, and Michael had hastily stripped off his outer garments and thrown them off the bridge. Mark had offered to show the place if needed. Indeed, police officers who had arrived on the scene at Mark's behest had found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Michael had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination. And the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. Tom denied ordering the massacre of his wife, claiming Michael acted alone. According to Tom, Michael knew Tom had money and was motivated by resentment over losing his job. Tom suggested Michael robbed his house, unaware Kelly was home, resulting in her death. However, Laura, a woman who played poker with Tom, revealed that Tom used her cell phone to make a call. The detective obtained the call records, confirming suspicions. The records showed Tom called Michael on the night of September 28th to 29th. Michael was tried first and maintained he was hired to set fire to the house for insurance purposes. He claimed he didn't kill Kelly and the blood on his clothes came from touching her dead body. He had disposed of his belongings to avoid suspicion of being at the Claytons' house that night. His testimony seemed convincing. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before delivering a guilty verdict on all counts against Michael Beard, who now faced life imprisonment. In contrast, Tom's lawyers managed to gather records of conversations and correspondence between Tom and Michael, but none of these clearly mentioned their nefarious plan. Furthermore, the prosecution's attempts to obtain billing transcripts of Tom's movements yielded no concrete evidence. All the evidence against Tom was circumstantial. However, one key detail caught the attention of investigators. The car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company. Moreover, on the day of the incident, Tom had arrived at the office in his personal Toyota but then switched to the company's pickup truck, which was later driven to Michael's house and left there. The truck was returned to the office the day after the tragedy. This suggested that Tom had, in fact, provided Michael with the car that he and Mark used to commit the crime. It was a crucial piece of evidence that the jury testified to during the trial. The 6-day trial concluded with the jury finding Tom guilty of hiring Michael to commit the heinous crime. Michael subsequently appealed, using the testimony of young Charlie, who claimed that the eyes behind the mask belonged to her father. However, the court dismissed the appeal due to the matching description of the clothing found under the bridge. Consequently, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard were sentenced to life in prison. Mark received a 4-year prison sentence for manslaughter. The custody of Tom and Kelly's children was awarded to Kelly's sister, Kim. With time, Charlie has learned to cope with the tragedy. Although she occasionally remembers her mother, she refuses to discuss her father, whom she will never want to see again. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Lindsay Cutshall. Lindsay Cutshall was born in 1982 in the small town of White Eyes, Ohio, to a devoutly Christian family. Her father was a pastor, and she was raised with strong religious values. Despite her strict upbringing, Lindsay was an adventurous and active child who enjoyed sports and later developed a passion for hiking and extreme tourism. After completing her education, Lindsay attended Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia, where she honed her outdoor skills. She regularly went on hikes, climbed mountains, and rafted down rivers, often organizing her own expeditions. Lindsay's dream was to establish a summer camp for children and teenagers, where she could teach them wilderness survival skills, rafting, and other outdoor activities. Jason Allen was born in 1978 in Zeeland, Michigan, to a deeply religious family. As a teenager, he became fascinated with hiking and wilderness survival. Jason was a tall, athletic, and charismatic individual who possessed natural leadership qualities, which drew like-minded people to him. He was passionate about exploring new heights and mastering outdoor skills. Lindsay and Jason met in 2002 during a hiking trip in the Appalachian Mountains. At the time, Lindsay was still a student, while Jason worked as a mountain guide and climbing instructor. They quickly formed a connection after meeting for the first time, leading the young man to ask for her hand in marriage just 6 months later. Both sets of parents gave their approval, and the young man proposed to his girlfriend with a beautiful diamond ring. Shortly after, he gave her a second engagement ring. As a couple, they made ambitious plans for their future. They intended to get married in September 2004 and buy a spacious house to raise a family. But things didn't turn out as expected. Before their wedding, they worked as senior counselors at a Christian summer camp called Rock and Water in California's El Dorado County. Their goal was to gain experience and eventually open their own camp after the wedding. On the Friday evening of August 14th, Lindsay and Jason decided to take a weekend trip to the San Francisco area. Before leaving, they informed their colleagues of their plans and left 2 experienced counselors in charge of the camp, ensuring a smooth transition. They told everyone they would return by Monday, expecting no issues for either themselves or their temporary replacements. With their plan in place, they set off in Lindsay's 1992 red Ford Tempo, and unfortunately, this was the last time anyone saw them alive. By Sunday evening, Jason and Lindsay, both counselors, had not returned to camp, but their absence did not raise immediate concern. It was assumed they would arrive late that night or early Monday. However, when they failed to appear at the Monday morning roll call at 8 a.m. and their phones were unreachable, their colleagues grew worried. The group quickly notified the police and then reached out to Jason and Lindsay's families to inform them about the situation. The parents went to the camp right away to get more information about the incident. Their colleagues were particularly concerned because Jason and Lindsay were known for their reliability and punctuality. If they had encountered any issues, they would have likely found a way to communicate. Upon arriving at the camp, law enforcement officials began questioning their colleagues, but the investigation quickly hit a roadblock. No one knew exactly where Jason and Lindsay had gone. They had planned to explore the San Francisco area, but their love for adventure and extreme activities made it likely that they were in a remote location with no access to communication or civilization. The police decided to wait for 48 hours, allowing the missing couple a window to possibly return home by themselves. In the meantime, concerned relatives and friends didn't want to delay any longer, and therefore decided to start searching. They reached out to everyone in their network, trying to gather information about the last time someone had contact with they. A missing person flyer featuring a photo of they was circulated, asking witnesses to report any potential sightings right away. By Tuesday, law enforcement had joined the search. The main focus was on the San Francisco area, its surrounding suburbs, and nearby localities. However, the large terrain made it challenging to thoroughly search every inch. A friend's insight that they frequently visited the secluded and picturesque rocky beaches led the police to concentrate on these locations. As the search effort dragged on for days, with several bodies found in sleeping bags in the targeted areas, the likelihood of finding they alive decreased significantly. On Wednesday, August 19th, a helicopter patrol spotted 2 bodies in sleeping bags on a remote rocky beach, indicating that the individuals were likely deceased rather than just resting. Upon arriving at the scene, police found a red Ford Tempo parked near a tourist shelter and a steep trail leading to a scenic beach. The car was identified as belonging to missing student Lindsay Cutshall after a database check. As officers descended the trail, they discovered 2 people in sleeping bags, who initially appeared to be sleeping. However, they did not respond to calls or noise. Closer inspection revealed that the individuals, a young man and woman, were deceased, with no signs of life. Preliminary examination suggested that they had been killed by gunshot wounds to the head, and the smell of decomposition indicated they had been there for over a day. All of their belongings, including phones, wallets, bank cards, and cash, were found next to them, ruling out robbery as a motive. The car keys were also visible, eliminating car theft as a motive. Investigators initially believed the deceased were the young couple who had gone missing near San Francisco the previous week. Documents found at the scene confirmed the identities of the victims as Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen. However, formal identification by their relatives was still necessary. When the parents arrived, they were overcome with grief upon recognizing the bodies of their children. The investigation led police to rule out initial theories of robbery or carjacking due to the presence of untouched valuables, money, and keys at the scene. Forensic analysis also showed no signs of physical or intimate assault on the bodies, except for the fatal gunshot wounds to the head. It appeared that Lindsay and Jason were peacefully sleeping and did not have time to react to the attack. They showed no signs of trying to defend themselves, escape, or even get out of their sleeping bags, indicating a sudden and deliberate act that was similar to an execution or a revenge killing. The brutal murder of 2 individuals on a secluded beach left investigators with many questions but no clear answers. The beach was difficult to access, and there were no signs of anyone else being in the area. Despite a thorough search, no shell casings were found, leading investigators to believe that the shooter may have taken them or thrown them into the ocean. The fact that the shots were fired at close range into the victim's head suggested that the casings should have been nearby if they hadn't been deliberately moved. A search of the area revealed an empty beer bottle a few meters from the crime scene. This was notable because Lindsay and Jason did not drink alcohol and led a healthy lifestyle, suggesting that the bottle may have belonged to the shooter. The brand of beer was unusual for the area and was more commonly found in a neighboring state. Although it was unclear whether the bottle was connected to the crime, it was considered a significant lead in the investigation. A theory emerged that Lindsay and Jason may have had a confrontation with someone the day before their deaths, and this person may have returned at night with a gun to settle the dispute. Although Jason and Lindsay were known for being friendly, it was possible they may have unknowingly offended someone. Additionally, the shooter may have been intoxicated or mentally unstable. Examination of the bullets found in the victim's skulls showed they came from a rare Marlin rifle, specifically a .45 caliber Model 18, produced in 1994 by Marlin Firearms Company. This type of rifle was typically used for hunting and was often part of a collector's arsenal. This discovery was a significant lead in the investigation, but it remained the only concrete clue at the time. Investigation suggested that the shooter was likely a lone male. He may have been a hunter, collector, or gun enthusiast. To further the investigation, authorities aimed to reconstruct their final route, identify who they may have contacted, and determine when they were last seen alive. Fortunately, they had taken many photos, and their camera was found intact among their belongings, which provided a useful starting point for tracking their movements. A guest book at a tourist cabin near the lookout point, where they had parked their car, contained entries expressing their delight with the weekend getaway. They had also visited a fishing pier about 20 miles away on Saturday, as evidenced by the photographs they took. Police officers returned to the pier and interviewed locals to find people who may have seen something significant. Several people remembered a young couple in a red car who inquired about overnight accommodations but found all 3 nearby hotels fully booked due to peak tourist season. They had dinner at a local restaurant, walked around the area, and took photos before leaving in the evening. According to those who saw and interacted with them, they was friendly, did not engage in any conflicts, and seemed carefree and happy. However, none of the witnesses could recall anything unusual or suspicious. The location where the bodies were found was a protected area, closed to camping. However, the young couple had nowhere else to stay overnight, so they decided to camp on the beach, using sleeping bags instead of a tent. They felt safe on the secluded beach on a warm August night and planned to return to the rock and water camp on Sunday. This information helped investigators narrow down the time frame of their deaths. Since they went to sleep but didn't survive until morning, it's likely they were killed between 11 p.m. on Saturday and dawn on Sunday. Despite the ongoing investigation and public appeals for information, police withheld certain details, including the results of the ballistics analysis. This action was taken to prevent the suspect from being tipped off and getting rid of the murder weapon before the investigation could start. The investigation first focused on a local homeless man who was known to sleep on the beach where the crime occurred. He was found and questioned by police, but despite not having an alibi for the night of the crime, he was not confirmed to be involved. The main reasons for this were that the murder weapon was never found and his DNA did not match the DNA found on a beer bottle discovered at the crime scene. The case went cold for nearly 2 years, but in the spring of 2006, police decided to release more information about the crime, including details about the weapon used. They also offered a $50,000 reward for any information that could help identify the perpetrator and solve the case. Following the public appeal, authorities received over 1,000 calls, but only a few were useful for the investigation. One individual, 26 years old Sean Gallen, drew particular attention from several locals who described him as an aggressive collector of firearms and blades. He was reportedly prone to conflicts, had a history of property damage, and frequently threatened violent behavior. The police investigated Sean Gallen and questioned him because they already knew him from previous incidents involving fights and drunk driving. Upon inspecting his possessions, Sean did possess numerous weapons but did not own the rifle in question. Authorities were unable to verify his whereabouts around the time of the crime due to the year gap, and his DNA did not match the sample found on the beer bottle at the crime scene, forcing his release. Meanwhile, international authorities were investigating another individual, 61 years old Joseph Henry Burgess, who made locals nervous due to his tendency to carry firearms and exhibit aggressive behavior. Burgess was described as erratic, often claiming he received orders from God, sparking suspicion that he could be the perpetrator. Joseph Burgess was living in Canada in the late 1970s, feeling lost and without a clear sense of purpose or direction in his life. In 1978, he joined the Children of God commune, presenting himself as a deeply devoted individual. Those around him considered him excessively zealous. A rivalry with two young members escalated into hostility, and shortly after, both individuals were found dead with multiple close-range gunshot wounds to the head. The circumstances of their deaths were particularly notable. Their bodies were discovered in sleeping bags on a beach, suggesting they were shot while asleep. By the time the authorities arrived, Joseph had disappeared. Although evidence left behind implicated him in the crime, he had already fled to the United States, crossing the border illegally. Joseph managed to evade capture for nearly 25 years until the police linked him to a double homicide in California. However, the opportunity to question him was lost when a shootout occurred during his arrest, resulting in the deaths of both a police sergeant and Joseph, who initiated the gunfire. This ultimately unresolved case remains shrouded in mystery. A 35-year-old man named Seamus Gallen was killed by his younger brother, Sean Gallen. The brothers had gotten into an argument, during which Sean, who was under the influence of illicit substances, shot Seamus 3 times with a gun. Sean had a history with the police, having been previously investigated for a double murder on a beach, but was released due to lack of evidence. Since then, Sean had been in trouble with the law twice for causing property damage and making threats, but only received fines. It was also discovered that Sean was an avid hunter and enjoyed making knives and other bladed weapons. People who knew him described him as antisocial, aggressive, and unpredictable. After killing his brother, Sean tried to run away but was caught almost immediately. The police decided to take another look at Sean's possible involvement in a crime that happened 13 years ago. They found useful information on his social media page, where he had posted pictures of his large collection of weapons and talked about his supposed psychic abilities. According to his posts, Sean believed he was on a special mission and was receiving instructions from outer space. Sean's behavior initially led police to suspect that he had serious mental health issues. He refused to cooperate with the investigation, spoke incoherently, and maintained his innocence. A new lead was found by investigators who examined private messages on the deceased brother's social media page, something no one anticipated. In 2006, a $50,000 reward had been offered for information about a double homicide case. Sean's former girlfriend had messaged his brother, suggesting that she could claim the reward by turning Sean in. It appeared that both the girlfriend and the brother had knowledge about the case, but they had chosen to remain silent. Unfortunately, it was no longer possible to question either of them, as the brother had been shot and the girlfriend had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. However, when Sean was shown the printouts of the messages between his former girlfriend and his brother, he made a shocking confession. Despite his initial denials, Sean began to provide a detailed account of the events surrounding the double homicide. His recollection of the details was vivid, even though more than 13 years had passed since the crime occurred. One evening, a man left his house with a Marlin rifle, planning to hunt in a nearby wooded area. However, after wandering aimlessly for a couple of hours, he decided to head down to a nearby beach, which he believed was a good spot to find wild boars. As he walked along the shore, he came across two sleeping bags with a young man and woman asleep inside. He stood there watching them for several minutes, when suddenly he heard voices in his head telling him to kill them. The man claimed that this was a mission from outer space that he had to carry out. So, he pointed his rifle directly at the young man's head and fired, instantly killing him. The sound of the shot woke she, but before she could even process what was happening, the man fired again, killing her as well. He then picked up the spent casings and put them in an empty beer can he had been carrying. Later, he threw the can into some bushes in his father's backyard, where he also hid the rifle, asking his father to keep it for him. Sean's father hid the murder weapon in the cellar of his old barn without asking any questions. Remarkably, Sean's account of the crime was later confirmed. When the barn eventually collapsed, the rifle was discovered at the site, and a beer can with shell casings was still hidden in the overgrown bushes in the backyard. The property's abandonment after Sean's father passed away in 2009 had helped preserve these key pieces of evidence. A beer bottle found on the beach was initially considered evidence, but it was later discovered to be unrelated to the crime. Sean claimed that voices in his head ordered him to commit violent acts and that he was not aware of his actions when he committed the crime. His defense argued that Sean was mentally ill and unfit to stand trial. The court relied on expert psychiatrists to assess the validity of these claims. The psychiatric evaluation found that Sean did indeed suffer from multiple mental health disorders, which were exacerbated by his use of alcohol and prohibited substances. However, the evaluation also showed that at the time of the crime, Sean acted with deliberation and careful planning, fully aware of his actions and the need to cover his tracks to avoid detection. Specifically, Sean deliberately killed the young man first, knowing that she would be less able to resist or defend herself if anything went wrong. Sean carefully removed the casings and handed the rifle to his father, instructing him to conceal it. Although psychiatrists diagnosed Sean with mental issues, they concluded he was mentally fit to stand trial and be held accountable for his actions. Notably, his family and former girlfriend were aware of or suspected his involvement in the double homicide, yet none of them reported him to the police. Sean's trial took place in the spring of 2019, nearly 15 years after the double homicide. On June 17, 2019, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole, plus an additional 94 years for killing his brother in 2017. He is currently serving his sentence in a special prison unit for inmates with mental disorders. Due to his continued claims of hearing voices and aggressive behavior, he is closely monitored to prevent harm to himself or others. The motive behind the double homicide was never established. According to reports, Sean randomly encountered they sleeping on the beach and decided to end their lives without apparent reason. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Kirsten Hatfield. Kirsten Hatfield was born on February 12, 1989, in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Kirsten's father left the family soon after her birth, and her mother, Shannon, moved back in with grandparents. When Kirsten was 2 years old, they moved to their own home. Later, Shannon remarried, but the marriage was short-lived, leaving Shannon to care for her 2 young daughters alone. Kirsten, being the older sibling, took on a lot of responsibility, helping her mother care for her younger sister, Faith. Kirsten and Faith shared a bedroom, while their mother slept in the adjacent room. On May 13, 1997, Shannon put her daughters to bed as usual. Kirsten was 8 years old, and Faith was 3. However, Faith had already fallen asleep, so Shannon only said goodnight to Kirsten and left the door to their room slightly open, as she always did, in case Kirsten or Faith needed her. At around 3 a.m., Shannon was awoken by a noise coming from the girls' room. Thinking one of her daughters was awake, Shannon got out of bed to check on them. As she approached the door, the noise stopped. Assuming her daughters had gone back to sleep, Shannon was about to return to her room when she noticed that the door to their room was now completely closed. This was unusual, as she was certain she had left it slightly open. She wondered if one of them had closed the door or if she had simply forgotten to leave it open. Shannon opened the door slightly to check, but she didn't enter the room before returning to bed. Shannon went to wake up her daughters at 6:30 a.m. the next morning, but only found Faith in their bedroom. Shannon asked Faith where Kirsten was, and when Faith said she didn't know, Shannon began a thorough search of the house. However, Kirsten was nowhere to be found. Shannon then checked outside the house and contacted the parents of Kirsten's friends to see if she had come to their house. But no one had seen her. Shannon's search efforts led her to call her father, who lived nearby, to see if Kirsten had gone to his house or not. Unfortunately, he hadn't seen her either. At this point, Shannon realized Kirsten was missing, and her father advised her to call the police. When the police arrived, they initially thought Kirsten might be hiding in the house or had simply wandered off for a walk, given the town's low crime rate. However, upon inspecting Kirsten's room, they found the window slightly open with a few drops of blood on the frame. This raised their suspicions that something more serious had occurred. Further investigation led them to discover a piece of children's underwear stained with blood on the ground outside the window. After confirming with Shannon that the underwear belonged to Kirsten, the police realized they were likely dealing with a kidnapping. More officers were called to the scene to assist with the investigation, which marked the beginning of a more extensive search for Kirsten. The police investigation into Kirsten's disappearance began with a search of the area around the house. During this search, the police spoke with Kirsten's mother, who reported hearing a noise at 3 a.m. and now realized that it may have been the sound of her daughter being taken. Despite the search, nothing suspicious was found, and the police began canvassing the neighborhood, speaking with all the residents. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors reported seeing or hearing anything unusual on the night of the abduction. However, one neighbor did mention being woken up by a barking dog around 3 a.m., which coincided with the time of the abduction. With no solid leads, investigators turned to a child psychologist to interview Faith, who was only 3 years old. Despite her young age, Faith was able to share what she had witnessed, but her statement was limited to a single phrase: "A bad person came and took my sister." This confirmed that Kirsten had not left the house voluntarily, but unfortunately, it did not provide any further information about the perpetrator or Kirsten's whereabouts. Detectives had to restart the investigation practically from scratch. Their initial suspicion leaned towards someone who knew Kirsten well, as it seemed unlikely that a stranger could abduct her from her own room without a sound. Working on this theory, police discovered that Kirsten's mother, Shannon, had a history of drug-related problems. The detectives considered the possibility that the abduction might be related to this. Perhaps the mother owed money to some people in the criminal underworld, and they decided to take her daughter as payment. The police did not rule out the mother willingly handing over her daughter. This would explain why the abduction happened almost silently. The investigation into Kirsten's disappearance continued, with detectives initially speaking to Shannon, her mother. Shannon denied any involvement, claiming to have been clean from substance abuse for some time and insisting she would never harm her daughter. Although detectives were not convinced of Shannon's innocence, they could not find any evidence to prove her involvement. The police then turned to the public for help, using the media to ask for any information that might be relevant to the case. In response, they received hundreds of calls, but most of the calls were fruitless. However, one clue provided a promising lead. A woman reported her boyfriend's suspicious behavior, including aggressive outbursts and a disturbing threat he made during an argument. The police investigated the man and discovered that he knew Shannon's brother, which meant Kirsten might have known him too. Additionally, the man had a history of drug use and assault, and he had previously been familiar with the Hatfield family home. Despite this, the investigation ultimately found that the man had a solid alibi for the time Kirsten went missing. Multiple witnesses confirmed that he was at a bar until around 4 a.m. on the night of the disappearance, making it impossible for him to have abducted Kirsten. Detectives pursued multiple leads, but each one led to a dead end. As time passed, the hope of finding Kirsten alive began to fade. Kirsten's mother, Shannon, refused to give up. She took matters into her own hands, determined to find her daughter. She gave interviews to local media outlets, distributed flyers, and even investigated potential suspects on her own. However, Shannon faced numerous obstacles. Many local businesses refused to display Kirsten's flyers, citing company policies. She also attempted to meet with the state governor, but was unsuccessful. Shannon established a volunteer center to help find Kirsten. The center focused on distributing flyers and engaging with the media. However, Shannon encountered new challenges. Some volunteers stole money, lied about their work, and used the media to gain attention for themselves. Despite these setbacks, Shannon persevered in her search for the truth. After years of effort, Shannon realized that her approach was not yielding results. She enrolled in college, earned a degree in criminology, and became a parole officer. Shannon's goal was not only to find her daughter's kidnapper but also to protect others from potentially dangerous criminals who might be released from prison. Shannon suspected Kirsten's kidnapper had a history of violent crimes. To pursue this lead, she researched people with violent pasts in her area but found no connection to Kirsten's disappearance. Despite her efforts, she eventually had to accept that Kirsten might have passed away and might not return. Still, Shannon continued to search for answers. Periodically, police reopened the case to investigate new leads, working with the FBI to create an updated sketch of Kirsten's possible appearance. In 2014, there was a breakthrough in the Kirsten case. A woman contacted the police and shared a shocking discovery she had made while sorting through her late mother's belongings. Among her mother's possessions was a diary detailing the woman's father's confession, claiming he had killed Kirsten Hatfield. The diary was extremely detailed, and detectives were convinced of its accuracy. According to the diary, the man had kidnapped Kirsten from her bedroom, took her to a house he owned in a nearby town, and murdered her after horribly torturing her. The description of the crime process spanned many pages, leaving even veteran investigators confused. The diary also revealed that the crime had been recorded on a videotape. Investigators immediately questioned the woman's father. However, his reaction was surprising. While he denied any involvement in the Kirsten case, he asserted that he had known who was responsible for Kirsten's death, saying the murder had occurred at his ex-girlfriend's house. The police were confused and asked for the house address. They quickly received a warrant and sent a team to thoroughly search this house. The forensic investigation began with a crucial step: the use of luminol, a substance that glows when exposed to very small amounts of blood. When the forensic team applied luminol to the scene, they were surprised by the results. An expert later described the house as lit up like a Christmas tree due to the numerous bloodstains. The bloodstains matched the details of the murder described in the diary, leading the team to believe they had finally found concrete evidence. To investigate further, police removed the floorboards, cut out sections of wallpaper, and sent these items to a laboratory for analysis. They also organized an excavation team in the hope of finding the victim's body. In addition, the police also discovered a box containing hundreds of videotapes in the house, so they had to review the diary. They suspected that one of the tapes might have contained footage of the victim being abused. Detectives meticulously reviewed each tape, but after hours of analysis, none of the tapes were related to the murder. Excavations also proved fruitless, with no remains or evidence found in the soil. However, Just when the investigation seemed to have been gaining momentum, the police encountered an unexpected and shocking episode. Experts who analyzed the bloodstains in the house concluded that the bloodstains had actually belonged to an animal, not a human. This revelation left the police stunned and wondering what had just happened. Had someone deliberately deceived them with a cruel joke? Or was the person writing the diary struggling with mental health issues and convinced by a false narrative that had developed in their mind? The truth was still unknown. Detectives had run out of leads in Kirsten's case, and the case was once again stalled. In an effort to revive the investigation, the case was reassigned to a new detective named Daryl Miller in the summer of 2015. Miller decided to start from scratch and review all existing documents and records. During his scrutiny, Miller discovered something surprising. His predecessors had overlooked some key evidence, including blood found on Kirsten's windowsill and on her underwear. The evidence had been stored in a warehouse, but shockingly had never been sent to a laboratory for analysis. Miller suspected that the reason for this might have been because police initially thought the blood belonged to Kirsten, which would not have yielded any useful results. However, Miller decided to send them to the laboratory for analysis. The results were surprising. The blood sample did not belong to Kirsten, but to an unidentified man. This was a significant breakthrough after many years of investigation. Miller decided to collect DNA samples from all the men who had participated in the investigation since the kidnapping. Police tracked down each person on the list and sent their DNA to a lab for analysis. Everyone was cooperative and provided their DNA samples quickly. Miller patiently waited for the results, and finally he received a call from the lab. Experts had analyzed one of the samples and found a perfect match with bloodstains found on the window and the victim's underwear. The DNA belonged to Anthony Palma, 56. The Hatfield family's neighbor who lived across the street. Anthony had been one of the first people the police spoke to on the day of the abduction. At the time, he claimed to have woken up around 3 a.m. due to his dog barking. Now that his DNA had been linked to the crime scene, detectives decided to bring him in for further questioning. Although the DNA evidence was sufficient for a conviction, the investigators hoped to obtain a confession from Anthony. A confession would expedite the trial and potentially lead them to Kirsten's body, which was still missing. To get Anthony to talk, the detectives invited him for questioning, telling him it was a routine process. They claimed they were re-interviewing everyone, including neighbors, to gather new information. In reality, their goal was to get Anthony to admit whether he had ever been inside the Hatfield family home. Detectives asked Anthony to recall any additional details about the night in question. He retold the same story he had shared 18 years earlier. But this time he added a new detail. He claimed to have seen a white car parked outside Kirsten's house, although he didn't think much of it at the time. The police then asked Anthony about his relationship with Kirsten and her family. He stated that he knew them as neighbors, but he had never interacted with Kirsten personally. He maintained that he got along well with the other neighborhood children, who would often ask him for help fixing their bikes or visit him for candy. This conversation became a critical point in the investigation, as the police had discovered Anthony's blood on the windowsill of Kirsten's bedroom. When they asked if he had ever entered the house, Anthony claimed he had not. This statement raised suspicions, as the presence of his blood suggested otherwise. The detectives faced a challenge. Anthony's blood was fresh, suggesting it had been left recently, but he had had a visitor to the house when it belonged to a friend. The investigators decided to move forward with the interrogation. Informing Anthony that his blood had been found in Kirsten's room and on her underwear. Anthony repeatedly denied ever entering the house, despite the evidence to the contrary. The investigators attempted to extract a confession, but he consistently maintained his innocence. The detectives changed their approach and exited the room, leaving Detective Miller to speak with Anthony privately. Miller entered with a photo of Kirsten, placing it in front of Anthony. However, Anthony promptly pushed the photo away, refusing to look at it for the remainder of the conversation. Miller asked various questions, attempting to prompt Anthony into a confession, but he continued to deny any involvement. Failing to obtain an admission of guilt, the police ended the interrogation and apprehended Anthony. A subsequent search of his residence, made possible by a search warrant, uncovered no evidence of Kirsten's remains or any other relevant evidence. During the trial, Anthony repeatedly denied any involvement in the crime. But DNA evidence told a different story. As the trial progressed, new details emerged that the police had initially overlooked. It was revealed that Anthony had a history of run-ins with the law, including a prior conviction for breaking into a girl's bedroom and assaulting her. He had also been imprisoned in the 1980s for a violent attack involving a weapon. Anthony's past convictions signaled his dangerousness, yet were overlooked in 1997. In 2017, a jury returned a guilty verdict for Kirsten's kidnapping and Kirsten's murder, and Anthony was sentenced to life in prison. Despite the guilty verdict, Anthony never disclosed the location of Kirsten's body. Kirsten's mother refused to give up hope, however. She consistently reached out to Anthony, calling and visiting him in prison, in an effort to find out where Kirsten's body was. She spent hours trying to extract the truth from him, but ultimately, she was unsuccessful. Tragically, in 2019, Anthony was killed by his cellmate, who was motivated by a desire for revenge for Anthony's horrific crime against a child. As a result, Kirsten's family's only hope of finding Kirsten's body now depends on hikers or tourists who might stumble upon it in remote national parks, where Anthony may have buried her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Chris Watts. Shanann and Christopher Watts, both from North Carolina, met in 2012. Shanann was from Aberdeen, while Chris hailed from Spring Lake. On November 3, 2012, they got married, but not everyone was pleased with their union. Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, did not attend the wedding due to Cindy's dislike of Shanann and the way she treated her son. A year after their wedding, Shanann and Chris made a significant decision to buy a new home in Frederick, Colorado. This marked a new chapter in their lives as they started fresh in their new home. After relocating to Colorado, the couple looked forward to starting a family. Their dream was realized on December 17, 2013, with the birth of their daughter, Bella Marie. 2 years later, on July 17, 2015, they welcomed their second daughter, Celeste Catherine, affectionately known as Cece. Shanann was diagnosed with lupus at a young age, a chronic autoimmune disease that affects various parts of the body. The immune system mistakenly attacks healthy cells and tissues, producing autoantibodies that target and destroy them, leading to inflammation and tissue damage. This diagnosis brought devastating news. It would be challenging for her to conceive and have children. Shanann had always dreamed of becoming a mother, and this revelation shattered her. However, she defied the odds, experiencing the incredible joy of motherhood, not once, but twice. Shanann was a warm and compassionate person who radiated kindness and positivity. Those who knew her described her as a loving and caring individual who made everyone feel welcome. She had a driven personality, always striving to create a better life for herself and her family. Her vibrant and warm nature effortlessly drew people to her. Shanann was an exceptional mother to her two daughters, Bella and Cece. Her love for them was boundless, and she cherished being a mother more than anything in the world. She was dedicated to providing for her children in every way possible, nurturing and supporting them unconditionally. Bella, the older sibling, was a caring and nurturing child who enjoyed taking care of her younger sister. Cece, on the other hand, was a lively and energetic child who brought joy and laughter to everyone's lives with her vibrant personality. Shannon's friends and family thought she had a perfect marriage, but they found Chris hard to get close to. Despite this, they welcomed him because Shannon was deeply in love with him. In 2015, Shannon and Chris filed for bankruptcy due to significant financial struggles. These included a large mortgage, car payments, loans, medical bills, and a substantial amount of credit card debt. At the time, Chris worked at Anadarko Petroleum, and Shannon worked at a children's hospital call center. By 2016, Shannon had started a new career as a consultant for a multi-level marketing company. She sold a nutritional supplement called Thrive, which was administered through a patch. Shannon was extremely passionate about her job. According to a coworker, Cynthia DeRosette, everyone who met her was drawn to her energy. Shannon was happy with her life, husband, and 2 daughters, but she had one wish remaining: to have a baby boy to complete their family. In spring 2018, she got an unexpected but pleasant surprise when she found out she was pregnant for the 3rd time. This news filled her with excitement and anticipation. After further tests, Shannon discovered she was having a baby boy. Shannon and Chris were overjoyed, and they chose to name their baby Nico. When Bella and Cece, Shannon's daughters, heard they were going to be big sisters, they were thrilled. During the summer of 2018, Shannon, who was pregnant with Nico at the time, visited her family in North Carolina, while Chris remained in Colorado for work. Shannon took her daughters, Bella and Cece, to visit Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie. Despite her strained relationship with her in-laws, Shannon wanted her daughters to spend time with their grandparents. When they arrived, Cindy prepared a snack for Cece despite knowing about her peanut allergy, which Shannon had warned her about. Cindy still served Cece a snack containing peanuts, which deeply upset Shannon. She felt that Cindy had recklessly endangered Cece's life. While visiting family in North Carolina, Shannon noticed a strange change in Chris's communication with her. He stopped responding to her messages and calls, leaving her confused and puzzled. When she asked him what was going on, Chris explained that he had taken on more responsibilities at work due to new employees, but assured her it was nothing to worry about. On July 31st, Chris flew from Colorado to North Carolina to spend the week with Shannon and their 2 daughters, Bella and Cece. The girls were thrilled to see their dad, and as Chris stepped off the plane, they rushed to him, beaming with excitement. Chris hugged them tightly, but his greeting to Shannon was different. Instead of a kiss, he simply nodded at her. Shannon felt deeply hurt by Chris's distant behavior and was unable to hide her emotions. She texted a friend, confessing her growing concern and sadness. She felt like Chris had changed somehow, and she barely recognized the man she had married. Her words were filled with a mix of sorrow and confusion. Shannon texted her friend to say that her husband Chris was refusing to talk to her, even though they were in the same room. Instead of speaking directly, they were communicating through their phones. Shannon shared a photo with her friend that showed her and Chris sitting on separate couches facing away from each other. In her texts, Shannon confided in her friend that she suspected Chris might be interested in someone else. Her friend was shocked and insisted that Chris would never do that, given how much he loved Shannon. In a heartfelt message to her friend, Shannon revealed that Chris had confessed to her that he no longer thought they were compatible. This revelation left Shannon stunned, as she had always believed their love was strong. Chris had made things even more difficult for Shannon by admitting that he had hoped getting her pregnant would change his feelings for her. But unfortunately, this didn't happen. Shannon was devastated to hear this, as she valued their relationship and believed their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacles. Determined to rescue her family, Shannon proposed that she and Chris attend couples therapy together, aware that their relationship was struggling and hoping that a professional could help them get through their problems. However, Chris refused point blank. Shannon was prepared to make sacrifices and do everything possible to save their relationship, but she quickly came to realize that Chris was unwilling to meet her halfway. Despite her best attempts, Shannon understood that there was nothing Chris was willing to compromise on, and this made her efforts futile. After returning home to Colorado from a trip to North Carolina, Shannon, Chris, and their daughters settled back into their normal routine. However, Shannon's stay was short-lived as she soon embarked on another trip to Arizona for business. During her time in Arizona, Shannon's friends noticed a change in her behavior. Instead of being her usual cheerful self, she seemed confused, upset, and distressed. One evening in their hotel room, Shannon confided in her friends about her concerns. On August 11th, while Shannon was with her friends in Arizona, she received a notification on her phone showing a charge on her and Chris's account from a restaurant. Although this wasn't unusual, the amount of the bill raised concerns. Shannon wondered why it was so high and suspected that Chris might be dining with another woman. This suspicion left her feeling uneasy and uncertain. Shannon returned home from her business trip around 1:48 a.m. on August 13th. Her friend Nicole Atkinson drove her home. The doorbell camera footage showed Shannon entering her house at that time. Shannon's friends were worried when she failed to send her usual good morning messages. They knew she had a crucial appointment at the OBGYN at 9:30 a.m., which she would never miss. However, when she also missed a 12:30 p.m. business meeting, her close friend Nicole Atkinson became extremely concerned. Nicole was convinced something was amiss when no one had heard from Shannon all day. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Feeling a growing sense of urgency, Nicole decided to drive to Shannon's house. As she approached the house, her anxiety spiked. Shannon's van was parked in the garage and her daily shoes were by the front door. Nicole knocked on the front door, hoping Shannon would come out and explain that she had overslept and was tired from her previous day's flight. But Shannon didn't respond. Chris was contacted by one of Shannon's friends who were unable to reach her. He told them not to worry, saying she might be at a friend's house with their daughters. However, this confused Shannon's friends, since they were all in touch with each other and none knew where she was. Shannon didn't have plans to meet any of them. When her friends threatened to report Shannon and the girls missing to the Frederick Police Department, Chris didn't want to involve the police. Despite this, Nicole, worried about her friend, called 911 to report Shannon, Bella, and Cece missing. After Nicole contacted the police, an officer from the Frederick Police Department responded to Shannon and Chris's residence. The officer's body camera footage showed Nicole was visibly distraught over her missing friend. As Nicole was providing every detail she knew about Shannon and her daughters, Chris arrived at the house. Chris exited his vehicle and approached the officer, but it was apparent he didn't share Nicole's level of concern, despite his wife and daughters being missing. During the search of Shannon and Chris's house, the officer found Shannon's purse. Inside, the officer discovered medication prescribed to Shannon and her two daughters. This discovery further alarmed Nicole, but Chris remained calm. The officer also located Shannon's wedding band on the bedside table. The officer and Chris visited a neighbor to review footage from their security camera, which captured part of Shannon and Chris's driveway and garage. The footage showed Chris opening the garage door, moving around, and leaving the home at 5:28 a.m. As they watched the TV footage, Chris's demeanor began to shift. He grew nervous and fidgety, seemingly uncomfortable with what he was seeing on screen. Even his neighbor noticed Chris's strange behavior. When Chris left the house, the neighbor discreetly confided in the officer, expressing doubts about Chris's behavior, stating that he didn't think Chris was acting normally. Concerned about Shannon's well-being, her friends wanted to launch a search for Bella and Cece immediately. However, Chris vetoed the idea, warning them against joining the search. His lack of concern for his wife and daughters deeply troubled Shannon's friends, who couldn't understand his apathy. Officers went door to door in Shannon and Chris's neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen Shannon or noticed anything unusual. The next day, The FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined the search for Shannon, Bella, and Cece. The Boulder Police Department also provided cadaver dogs to search the property and house. As officers searched the home, a handler commented that the house smelled of cleaning solutions and looked unusually clean, which raised suspicions. The presence of cleaning solutions suggested that someone might be trying to conceal evidence or clean up potential clues. Chris gave an interview outside his home while it was being searched, saying he and Shannon had an emotional conversation before she left, but no argument. He made a heartfelt plea for their return, but came across as aloof and unemotional, sparking suspicion. On August 14th, Special Agent Coder conducted an interview with Chris. During this interview, Chris shared his theory that Shannon might have taken the girls to a friend's house to relax and unwind given the situation. Meanwhile, the police station was flooded with tips about potential sightings of Shannon and the girls, including various photographs. However, when asked to identify any of the individuals in the photos as his missing wife and daughters, Chris was unable to do so. Agent Coder also inquired about Chris and Shannon's marriage. Chris asserted that he had never been unfaithful to Shannon, and, to the best of his knowledge, Shannon had never been unfaithful to him either. He explained that they were the kind of couple who would confide in each other if they ever felt the urge to stray. Throughout the interview, Agent Coder observed Chris's unusual behavior, specifically his frequent hand movements towards his neck. This caught Agent Coder's attention and sparked his suspicion, leading him to wonder if these movements might be indicative of something more significant. During the interview, Agent Coder stepped out briefly to share his suspicion with the other officers that Chris might have strangled Shannon. As more time passed without any sign of Shannon or her daughters, worry and despair deepened among their loved ones. Despite their growing doubts about Shannon's safety, they clung to the hope that Bella and Cece might still be alive. Chris was released from the police department after 3 hours of questioning. However, the authorities asked him to return the next day, August 15th, for a polygraph test, and he agreed. On August 15th, Chris picked up his father from the airport and drove to the Frederick Police Department. Tammy Lee from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation administered the polygraph test. During the test, Chris denied knowing Shannon's whereabouts and claimed he had no role in her disappearance. He didn't pass the test, leaving detectives convinced of his involvement in the disappearance and deaths of his wife and daughters. However, they still needed to persuade him to confess. The special agent, Tammy Lee, a highly skilled coder and polygraph expert, confronted Chris about his failed polygraph test results. Chris admitted that he had not physically harmed Shannon, but acknowledged that he had caused her emotional suffering. Additionally, he confessed to having an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger. Chris expressed remorse for his infidelity, stating that he had never intended to engage in such behavior. However, he denied any involvement in the disappearance of his family. During the interview, Chris asked to speak with his father, Ronnie. The officers were initially hesitant, worried that allowing Ronnie into the room would prompt Chris to request legal representation. Despite their reservations, they allowed it, hoping Ronnie's presence might persuade Chris to confess. In the interrogation room, Chris confessed to killing Shannon, claiming he did it because she had supposedly harmed their daughters, Bella and Cece. However, Shannon's friends were certain Chris was lying, knowing that Shannon would never hurt her children, whom she loved deeply and was eager to welcome her new son, Nico. Chris admitted to burying Shannon's body in a shallow grave at one of his work sites and disposing of his daughters' bodies in oil tanks. Despite being arrested and taken into custody, he persisted in denying any harm to them. The detectives didn't believe for a second that Shannon had harmed her daughters. Chris pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the sentencing hearing, the judge made a bold statement about the heinous crime Chris had committed. calling it the most inhumane and vicious one he had encountered in his career, despite having dealt with thousands of cases. Years later, Chris confessed to murdering his wife Shannon in their bed. He had strangled her after she confronted him about his extramarital affair and threatened to take their daughters away. He then put her body in his truck and drove to his work site with their 2 daughters. There, Chris claimed to have killed his daughters, one by one, in a horrific sequence of events, where one daughter was forced to witness her sister's death before meeting the same fate. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nicole lled. Around 5 p.m. on August 19, 2014, a man called Portland's Emergency Services in Oregon, USA, to report a woman who had been stabbed in the chest. The victim was still alive but struggling to breathe, so the caller urged the operator to send an ambulance to the Timber Creek apartments as quickly as possible. As police officers rushed to the scene, they had no idea that the victim's final words would hold the key to cracking the case. The victim, later identified as Nicole lled, had been receiving assistance from the couple living at the crime scene when paramedics arrived. Despite their best efforts, Nicole sadly succumbed to her injuries, but not before uttering a crucial phrase. The detectives spoke with the 911 caller, who provided a more detailed account of what had occurred. While walking down the stairs of the apartment building towards the parking lot with his wife, the man heard a scream. He turned to his right and saw a woman running towards them, shouting, "He stabbed me. He stabbed me." The woman explained to the couple that she did not know her attacker, but was able to describe him as wearing camo pants and a black hoodie. The manager of the Timber Creek apartments identified a 29-year-old colleague, Nicole lled, as the victim. She had been working as a leasing consultant at the complex for a few weeks. On August 19th, as part of her duties, Nicole drove a golf cart around the complex to deliver lease renewal letters to residents. Each applicable resident also received a balloon tied to a package of popcorn. Based on Nicole's notes and the map found in the golf cart, detectives pinpointed the likely location of the attack to a specific stairwell breezeway at Timber Creek. They also discovered several pieces of evidence that supported this theory, including a trail of blood droplets leading from the stairwell and leaflets scattered at the foot of the stairs. During the investigation led by the Washington County Sheriff's Office, multiple witnesses came forward reporting a suspicious individual, described as a young male wearing a black hoodie and camel-colored pants, seen in the vicinity of Timber Creek around the time of the attack. By analyzing the reports and timelines of each sighting, detectives were able to reconstruct the path the suspect took to enter and exit Timber Creek. Over 20 law enforcement officers, aided by K-9 units, conducted an intensive search. The Washington County Search and Rescue Team focused on the wooded areas surrounding Cedar Mill Creek, which flows through the Timber Creek apartment complex. During the search, several items were found and sent to the lab for analysis to determine their potential evidentiary value. While the detectives did not reveal the specifics of their discoveries, they stated that they were exploring every possible scenario. The investigators were working to determine the motive behind the brazen daylight attack in an apartment complex home to over 1,000 residents. They informed Chris lled, Nicole's husband, about the incident. Nicole already had a daughter when she met Chris, who had 2 daughters from previous relationships. The couple later had a son together after getting married. As a teenager, Nicole survived cancer and developed an interest in fitness and bodybuilding. She took part in competitions and aspired to become a coach someday. The police took steps to identify the perpetrator, ruling out robbery as a motive, since nothing was stolen and no attempt was made to remove her clothes. This led detectives to suspect that the attack might be motivated by personal reasons, prompting them to focus their attention on Chris, Nicole's husband. As William once wrote, "Love that transcends this world cannot be separated by it, Death cannot destroy what is immortal. Nicole was an extraordinary woman, a devoted wife, exceptional mother, and a friend to everyone. She was never afraid to express her faith or opinions openly with others. Her ultimate goal was to leave this world a better place than when she entered it. Meanwhile, during interviews with Timber Creek Apartments residents, police identified 2 additional witnesses who reported seeing a man wearing a black hoodie and camouflage pants. This couple claimed to have seen a man matching the suspect's description running across the road without looking around, approximately at the same time Nicole was attacked. The witnesses saw the man, with his hood up, running towards the houses directly across the street from the Timber Creek Apartments. Based on witness descriptions, detectives created a composite sketch of the suspect, which was promptly distributed throughout the city and featured on television news programs. Authorities urged anyone who recognized the individual, even if only slightly, to come forward with information. Detectives collaborated with their informants, seeking any information that could lead them to the murderer's whereabouts. The suspect's sketch generated several promising leads. One such lead came from a man who claimed his son was acquainted with an individual named Taylor. Allegedly, Taylor had been intimidating people with a knife recently. The police located Taylor and brought him in for questioning. During the interrogation, Taylor made some bizarre statements, leading investigators to suspect he might be struggling with mental health issues. When asked about Nicole, Taylor responded unequivocally, stating he was responsible for her death. However, his story was riddled with inconsistencies, parroting details from the news and fabricating unrelated information. Consequently, the police ruled Taylor out as a suspect. After the police released the suspect's sketch to the news, they received a new lead about a man named Nick with a prior criminal record. Although Nick bore some resemblance to the sketch, his criminal history did not involve physical harm to others. The police brought Nick in for questioning, but his behavior raised suspicions. When questioned about Nicole's case, Nick denied any involvement and requested a lawyer. Following this, the police obtained a search warrant for Nick's home, where they found a black hoodie and camouflage pants. However, the hoodie did not match the witness's description, as it featured a prominent white logo on the front. The police sent the clothing to the lab for analysis, but no evidence linking Nick to the crime was found. They also obtained Nick's mobile phone records, which showed he was not near the crime scene at the time of Nicole's attack. As a result, the police cleared Nick as a suspect, and the investigation came to a standstill. Chris Lobby spoke to reporters about the difficult time his family was going through. He couldn't shake off the thoughts of what had happened to Nicole, his mind constantly racing with unanswered questions and different scenarios. "The hardest part is not having answers," he said. The police were concerned the perpetrator might strike again, and sadly, their fears were realized. On September 13, 2014, just 3 weeks after Nicole's death, the Eugene Police Department in Oregon received a disturbing call. Eugene is Oregon's second-largest city, located about 100 miles from Portland. On September 13th, a resident was attacked while leaving a bar near Autzen Stadium after watching a game. That evening, 39-year-old Heather Miller had gone to a nearby bar to watch the game. When the game ended around 8 p.m., she decided to head home. Since the streets were almost empty, she left the bar to call a cab, but discovered her phone was out of battery. Her next move was to walk closer to the stadium in hopes of hailing a taxi. While walking along the sidewalk, she soon noticed that someone was walking behind her. Crossing to the other side of the street and turning around, she saw that the man following her had done the same. She quickened her pace, but soon felt a blow to the back of her head, which knocked her unconscious. When she regained consciousness, she found herself face to face with the criminal, who by this time had pulled off her pants in an effort to fulfill what was most likely the motive for the attack. Heather tried to reason with him. She told him she had a daughter and asked him to please let her see her daughter again, but he kept punching her regardless. Heather said that for every word she uttered, she received a punch in the face. At some point, Heather realized that her only chance to survive was to pretend to be dead. She closed her eyes and didn't move. When the attacker got what he wanted, he immediately ran away. This man severely beat Heather, but she found the strength to stand up and walk out into the middle of the road. A minute later, a car stopped and the driver called 911. Paramedics soon arrived and took her to the hospital. She was conscious and was able to talk to a detective who arrived soon after. At that time, neither she nor the detective knew that the one who attacked her was already at the police station. There's a park near the stadium where the man attacked Heather. A policeman on a bicycle was on duty there that evening. He saw a man running away, stopped him, and noticed that his hands and shoes were bloody. The officer detained him and called a patrol car, which took the detainee to the police station. Despite his age, 17-year-old Jamie Tinoco had repeatedly come to the attention of the police. At the time of his arrest, he was on probation for unlawful possession. Tinoco started using substances at the age of 12, and according to his parents, they could not control him. He dropped out of high school when he was a freshman, and just a day before the attack on Heather Meir, he was arrested for driving without a driver's license but was soon released. During interrogation, Tinoco confessed to attacking Heather. The guy behaved absolutely calmly and indifferently because he had believed he'd done nothing wrong. His behavior gave the Eugene Police Department reason to assume that Heather was not his first victim. The police released his photo, thinking that there might be other women affected by his actions who would come forward. After releasing Tinoco's photo, the Eugene police caught the attention of detectives investigating Nicole Laub's death. They noticed that Tinoco's facial features bore a strong resemblance to those of the suspect in their composite sketch. As they dug deeper, they discovered that Tinoco resided with his parents in Portland, and their apartment was conveniently located directly across the street from Timber Creek. This alarming coincidence further fueled their suspicion that Tinoco might be the perpetrator responsible for Nicole Laub's tragic demise. The detectives questioned Jamie about Nicole Laub's case, hoping he would admit to assaulting her, just as he had confessed to assaulting Heather Miller. However, Tinoco denied any involvement in Nicole's death and refused to answer their questions. Consequently, the police had to search for evidence to connect him to Nicole Laub's murder. Jamie Tinoco had lived with his parents in a residence directly opposite the Timber Creek apartment complex. Following this, the police secured a search warrant for his parents' apartment, whereupon they discovered a black hoodie and camouflage pants in Jamie's room. These items were subsequently sent to a laboratory for analysis. Nevertheless, the laboratory report proved disappointing, as it did not reveal any DNA evidence linking Nicole to any of Jamie Tinoco's possessions, and consequently the investigation stalled. Although there was no conclusive proof that Tinoco was responsible for Nicole's death, there was a significant amount of evidence connecting him to the assault on Heather Miller. During the trial related to the attack on Heather Miller, Tinoco did not dispute his involvement and even seemed to take pride in his actions, presenting himself as a youthful gang member. He was unapologetic, smiling, and conveying a sense of no remorse for what he had done. Tinoco had wandered away from a group of young offenders who were on a supervised trip with the Washington County Juvenile Department. He approached Heather from behind, hit her, knocking her out, and then pulled her into the bushes near Watson Stadium. As a result of the attack, Heather still experiences nightmares and flashbacks. She also suffered physical harm, including a chipped front tooth. Additionally, the attack left her with a broken nose and other injuries that required reconstructive surgery to fix. Since then, Heather has had to cope with the trauma by finding a new job, and even now, she becomes uncomfortable when people approach her from behind or when she walks alone on the street, especially at night. Heather Miller clutched two family members' hands as she sat with more than a dozen supporters before reading her statement aloud in the Lane County Circuit Court. Tinoco appeared to be grinning in court as the victim stood recalling the disturbing details of her attack, how she begged for her life to see her daughter again. When the judge asked Tinoco why he was grinning, he said he didn't know. The judge said the fact that he showed no remorse scared her and called Tinoco a danger to the public, imposing a maximum sentence. The victim, surrounded by her friends and family, walked out of the courtroom. As a brave mother of two, she had told the judge that she prayed Tinoco would never have the chance to harm anyone else in the same way. Refusing to be defined by her ordeal, she was determined to read her statement aloud and make her voice heard, demonstrating remarkable strength and resilience from the very beginning. The judge was not swayed by the defense's portrayal of Tinoco as a teenager whose actions were influenced by years of substance abuse. Instead, the judge formed an opinion about Tinoco's character based on his behavior in the courtroom. Tinoco's lawyer, Chris Schaffner, requested a prison sentence of 8 years and 4 months for his client. However, when the judge gave Tinoco the opportunity to address the court, he failed to apologize, despite his emotional parents sitting just a few rows behind him. Judge Deborah Vogt sentenced Tinoco to 14 years and 2 months in prison, saying his apparent lack of remorse warranted the long sentence and that the community needs to be protected from a dangerous man. She said that by the time Tinoco is eligible to be released, he'll be in his early 30s and will have to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, investigators exploited Tinoco's exaggerated self-importance to extract a confession from him. They re-questioned him about Nicole Laub's death, suggesting that he would gain more respect from fellow inmates if they knew he had taken a woman's life. After a brief silence, Tinoco began discussing Nicole, claiming he hadn't intended to harm her. He confessed that he had wanted to stab someone merely to experience the feeling. According to him, his goal wasn't to kill Nicole, but rather to injure her. He recounted that, after crossing the street from his apartment to Timber Creek, he saw Nicole parking a golf cart and carrying a small package containing a balloon to an upstairs apartment. As Nicole ascended the stairs, he hid behind a golf cart, then rushed to the stairs. And when she returned downstairs, he took a deep breath and stabbed her. Tinoco said he chose Nicole because she looked like easy prey. When asked if he had tried to force Nicole into intimacy, as he did with Heather Meller, he replied that he was thinking about doing the same. He was going to do the same. He stated that he didn't do it only because Nicole screamed really loud when he stabbed her, so he ran away. During the reenactment of the crime, Tinoco demonstrated to the investigators how he had escaped from the crime scene. Chris Laub expressed his shock upon learning that the individual responsible for taking his wife's life was only 17 years old. He stated, "As a father of a 13-year-old daughter, it's incomprehensible to think that someone just 4 years older than her could commit such a heinous act." The trial, which started in 2015, took an interesting turn when Tinoco proclaimed his innocence in court, contradicting his earlier confession during the interrogation. His lawyer emphasized that there was no DNA evidence to connect his client to the crime scene. Defense attorney Robert Axford made an emotional plea, saying, "I'm simply asking for mercy for this 17-year-old child who is severely mentally ill and has the potential to change his behavior with proper treatment to rectify the deep-seated issues he's struggling with." The defense called a second psychologist to testify, who had assessed Tinoco and concluded that he showed symptoms of schizophrenia. In contrast, a psychologist from the Oregon State Hospital, who had also examined Tinoco, disagreed, diagnosing a personality disorder rather than schizophrenia. Ultimately, the jury was convinced of Tinoco's guilt after viewing a video recording of his confession and a reenactment of the crime, which was part of the investigative experiment. During the reenactment of the crime, Tinoco revealed specific details that only the perpetrator who attacked Nicole Laub could have known. In the penalty phase, the jury faced two options: sentencing Tinoco to life imprisonment without parole or to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. However, the jury decided that there were not enough mitigating circumstances to justify a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Consequently, Tinoco was found guilty on all counts in 2017. Tinoco, who was already 20 years old at the time, was standing at the front of a Washington County courtroom between his two attorneys as Circuit Judge Kirsten Thompson asked if he had any words before she officially sentenced him to life in prison without parole. He held his hands down below his waist in front of him, his mouth twitching. "I ask for forgiveness," Tinoco said. He then sat down. Chris Lobb, Nicole's husband, said Tinoco's family approached his family after the sentencing. They expressed condolences and apologized. In 2021, the Oregon Court of Appeals overturned the 2017 conviction of Tinoco. Since his trial, juvenile laws have changed significantly. Tinoco was convicted of a Measure 11 crime, but under current juvenile reforms, offenders between 15 and 17 years old are no longer automatically sent to adult court. Instead, prosecutors must request a hearing to decide whether juveniles accused of serious crimes should be tried as adults. If Tinoco is retried and reconvicted, his defense team may seek a lesser sentence. The Lobby family, including Nicole's father, Rich Jones, were shocked and saddened by the overturned conviction, knowing they would have to relive the emotional trauma of the trial. Despite the setback, Tinoco remains in prison, and the Nicole Lobb case is far from over. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of West family. The West family appeared to everyone as a strong, happy, and well-off unit. The couple had been married for 14.5 years, raising a daughter together. They never gave anyone reason to suspect any difficulties in their marriage. That was until the early morning of January 13, 2018, when 42-year-old Mrs. West was found deceased near her own home. To understand why, we need to delve into the West family's history from the beginning and unravel the rumors about the late housewife's double life that had been circulating for years. Kat Dawn West, née Martin, was born on February 15, 1975, in the quaint town of Davie, Florida, the only child of Nancy and Jonathan Martin. She grew up in a modest family environment. As a child, she yearned for a younger sibling, a dream unfulfilled due to her mother's health issues. Perhaps this is why Kat was overly attached to dolls. She treated them like living beings, singing to them and cradling them. In school, Kat was known for her beauty and sociability, actively participating in sports and dance. During her teenage years, signs of bipolar affective disorder began to show. This included days of depression and anxiety, alternating with periods when she felt overly happy and restless. Unfortunately, her parents didn't notice her condition right away. By then, Kat had started drinking to manage her emotions. It wasn't until she sought for alcoholism that the cause of her issues was identified. In her 20s, Kat managed to overcome alcohol dependency. Dealing with bipolar disorder, however, proved more challenging. She needed several strong medications that led to complex drug interactions and side effects. Eventually, they got the disorder under control, but she had to stay on medication until her untimely death. Kat longed for marriage, a family, and children, but her personal life had many difficulties, likely because of her mental health and alcohol problems. Despite this, the attractive blonde had numerous admirers and was often the life of the party. In her youth, Kat wanted to be a model. She went to castings and tried different looks. She was fascinated with Marilyn Monroe from the 1950s. Kat watched Monroe's movies on repeat, collected posters, and imitated her style and image. She even looked a bit like Marilyn, something she was proud of. Though Kat's dream of becoming a famous model didn't come true, her photos often appeared in local magazines. This gave her some recognition and occasionally made people recognize her in her hometown streets. At 28 years old, she finally met William West, the man she'd start a family with. William Jeffrey West, who mostly went by his middle name, was born in 1970 in Alabama into an ordinary family. From an early age, he dreamed of a career in the military or law enforcement. He was a diligent student and active sports enthusiast, robustly fit and incredibly focused. In the early 1990s, William joined the U.S. military, serving initially as a military police officer. William's commitment and dedication led him to become a military recruiter, responsible for enlisting individuals into the Army and Navy. Over time, he rose to head a recruitment division. In total, William devoted 2 decades to military service. Alongside his military career, William pursued higher education. He earned a bachelor's degree in public from the University of Carolina and continued his studies in criminal justice and disaster and emergency management, eventually earning a master's degree. William was intelligent, composed, and goal-oriented, yet modest and somewhat introverted. He preferred quiet gatherings over loud parties and generally shunned the spotlight. He married young and had 2 children, known for being a devoted family man and responsible parent. Upon retiring from the military, William became a corporal in the police department of a university town. He was entrusted with ensuring the safety of the campus community, approaching his duties with seriousness and responsibility. Although he was issued a service firearm, he never had to use it throughout his career. Kat and Jeffrey were an unusual but happy couple. Their paths crossed in the mid-2000s when Jeffrey was still serving in the military and married to his first wife. It seemed unlikely that the stern, quiet military man had anything in common with the flamboyant, bold, attention-loving blonde, yet they felt an instant mutual attraction. Despite their 5-year age gap, Jeffrey's existing marriage, and Kat's periodic struggles with alcohol, which she continually fought, their relationship blossomed. Jeffrey soon filed for divorce to be with his new love, and within less than 5 months of meeting, they surprisingly tied the knot in a Las Vegas chapel. In 2005, the couple welcomed their only child together, a daughter named Lola. They settled in the quiet town of Sarah, Alabama, Jeffrey's home state, in a custom-built cozy home that Kat personally designed. She adorned their bedroom with portraits of her idol, Marilyn Monroe. Neighbors frequently praised the Wests, describing them as a happy couple despite being complete opposites. Caitlin always strived to look stunning and attractive with bold makeup, stylish hair, and Barbie-like outfits. She thrived on catching people's glances and loved compliments, always appearing cheerful and smiling. Jeffrey, in contrast, seemed overshadowed by her presence, appearing reserved, serious, and highly disciplined, a reflection of his long military career. Despite her efforts and striking looks, Kat couldn't carve out a successful modeling career after marriage and the birth of her daughter. She focused on creating a cozy home and raising her child. Yet the mundane life of a homemaker wasn't enough. She craved attention and recognition. With the rise of social media in the late 2000s, she began actively posting pictures online. Initially, these were harmless Barbie or Marilyn Monroe-themed photos, but gradually they became more provocative and daring. Close sources say her husband not only didn't mind her new hobby but often played the role of her personal photographer. It seemed harmless and eventually became a lucrative venture for Kat through paid subscriptions. One day, they bought a selection of ready-made seafood dishes from a popular local restaurant, a bottle of fine brandy and absinthe from the supermarket, along with aromatic candles Kat picked from a nearby store to set a romantic mood. Captured on surveillance cameras at each location, they appeared happy and carefree, smiling and joking with no hint of the impending tragedy. Returning home with their purchases, the couple enjoyed their dinner and indulged in the alcoholic beverages. Kat, who had intermittently battled alcohol dependency, requested Jeff conduct a hot photo session, first in lingerie and then without any clothes. Jeff was not opposed. He took several revealing shots that were posted on Kat's private OnlyFans profile by around 1 p.m. The romantic evening, intended to culminate in a passionate night, deteriorated into a nightmare that led to a tragic outcome, culminating in the discovery of a body on the road. Early on the morning of January 13th, around 5 a.m., a young neighbor of the West was on her way to work. Although sun had not yet risen, it was light enough outside. As she passed the West's house, something caught her eye. It took her a moment to comprehend what it was. Slowing down, she soon realized an almost fully unclothed woman was lying motionless on the road. Additionally, she thought she saw someone standing on the doorstep of the house, who quickly vanished into the shadows upon noticing her. During questioning, she couldn't definitively state whether this person entered the house or ran off down the street. Startled and uncertain about what to do, the young woman hesitated to approach the body. She returned home and informed her parents. Together, they called emergency services to report this grim discovery. At the operator's request, and while waiting for help to arrive, they reluctantly approached the woman on the ground, recognized as Mrs. West, and checked for a pulse. Tragically, there was none. Her body was cold and already showing signs of rigor mortis. Mrs. West was found face down with most of her body on the sidewalk, dressed only in a bright pink bralette top. A pool of blood had formed under her head, and nearby lay a bottle of absinthe with some of its contents spilled on the road and blood stains on it. A short distance away lay her smashed smartphone. Since it was a quiet residential area, there were no other witnesses during the night. Thus, the time gap between when Mrs. West's car was last seen around 8:30 p.m. and 5 a.m., when the neighbor discovered Catlin's lifeless body, remains shrouded in mystery, likely only witnessed by her husband. What might Mr. West be concealing? Detective Michael Melhoff was among those first arriving at this troubling scene and proceeded to inquire at the house where Mrs. West's body had been found. A man answered the door appearing somewhat anxious, but professing ignorance regarding the situation at hand. When asked about his wife's whereabouts, he said he'd woken up and didn't find her in bed. The detective then asked him to step outside, informing him that a woman's body, identified by neighbors as Cat West, was found near the house. Throwing on a jacket, the man followed the officer and confirmed that the deceased was indeed his wife. However, Jeff's reaction was unusually calm. He did not rush to the body with tears or screams. When questioned about his whereabouts and activities during the night, Mr. West stated he had slept soundly as they had been drinking the previous evening. When asked what he thought had happened, he merely shrugged, suggesting it might have been an unfortunate accident. Mr. West also shared that his wife suffered from bipolar affective disorder, requiring medication, and struggled with alcohol, behaving erratically when intoxicated. He mentioned that she would sometimes jump on their backyard trampoline, occasionally missing it and injuring herself. A search of the house revealed no signs of a struggle or violence. 2 plates with leftover food, 2 glasses, and a half-empty brandy bottle were on the kitchen table. Her high heels captured in her last pictures lay under the table, and underwear matching the bra she was wearing when found was on the floor. However, several blood-stained napkins in the trash and an open bottle of cleaner raised questions. That day, Jeffrey was taken into custody as the main and sole suspect in the case. Chronologically describing the last evening spent with his wife, Jeffrey noted that she drank heavily, which he greatly disliked. After a revealing photo session, he hoped they would move to the bedroom for a more intimate setting. He stepped away to shower for a few minutes and returned to find his wife still sitting at the table, drinking straight from the bottle and texting someone on her phone. Jeff was angered by this, and his requests to put away the gadget were ignored by Kat. He tried to snatch the phone from her hands, leading to a minor scuffle, during which he accidentally elbowed his wife's face, causing a few drops of blood to appear from her nose. According to him, this was the blood police found on discarded napkins. Mr. West eventually took the phone from his wife and, opening the door, hurled it into darkness. He claimed that, after this event, he turned around and went to bed, convinced that his spouse would soon calm down and join him. He allegedly remained unaware of how events unfolded further until the police knocked on his door, asking about. He speculated that his wife might have gone outside to find her phone, taking the absinthe bottle with her to finish it. He also suggested that she might have fallen, hit her head on the bottle, lost consciousness, and froze to death, or that someone might have attacked her. Mr. West couldn't explain why Mrs. West was without the bottom part of her enticing pink lingerie set, or why she went to look for her phone in just a bra without putting on any outerwear hanging near the entrance. He attributed such behavior to alcohol intoxication. The suspect's story seemed suspicious and inconsistent. He claimed to be too intoxicated to remember certain details, leaving the investigation to piece together the sequence of events. The evidence was scarce and there were no witnesses. The autopsy determined that the cause of death for the 42-year-old woman was blunt force trauma to the head, likely inflicted with the absinthe bottle found nearby, compounded by hypothermia. At the time of the incident, her blood alcohol level exceeded 2.5 per ml, indicative of severe intoxication with impaired coordination and a high risk of losing consciousness. At first glance, everything seemed to align. Kat, heavily intoxicated, ventured outside searching for her phone, taking along the unfinished bottle of absinthe. She likely lost her balance, possibly while reaching for her gadget, hit her head on the bottle, lost consciousness, and died from the injury and exposure. The bottle with blood traces lay near her head, and the smartphone, the reason she left the house, was found nearby. However, the investigation found this scenario too simplistic and staged. Experts confirmed that the head injury was inflicted with the bottle beside the body. Forensic analysis suggested that if she had fallen on her own, the bottle likely would have rolled away rather than remained parallel to her head. Both Kat's and her husband's fingerprints were found on the bottle, along with several smudged prints that couldn't be identified. The blood-stained napkins and the open bottle of household cleaner discovered in the house led investigators to a different conclusion. Their theory, later presented as the primary and only plausible one in court, suggested the couple argued over Kat's preoccupation with her subscribers. In a fit of anger, Jeff struck her with the bottle, causing a fatal injury. Panicking, he tried to stage an accidental fall by cleaning the blood in the house, but failed to dispose of all evidence. Partially supporting this theory was the fitness app on Jeff's phone, which tracked his steps. According to the app, he was active around the house until midnight and again early in the morning before police arrived. This contradicted his claim of being asleep. Police speculated that he was attempting to conceal evidence during these times. A third person involved, the neighbor who discovered the body, recalled during questioning that she saw a male silhouette on the doorstep who quickly left in an unknown direction. She couldn't confidently assert whether it was Mr. West or someone else in the dim early dawn light. Additionally, she couldn't discern if this person entered the house or not. This information intrigued investigators. Considering Kat's popularity online, she had many male admirers who paid to view revealing photos. A new theory emerged. An obsessed follower among her subscribers might have sought a personal encounter with Kat and tracked her down, hoping for closer acquaintance. While Kat did receive messages from various men, sometimes with inappropriate proposals, she maintained her distance. No explicit threats or harassment were found in these communications. A few particularly persistent fans living in other states with solid alibis were quickly ruled out as suspects. Nevertheless, footprints not belonging to homeowners were found on the doorstep and vanished into the lawn. Their origin remained a mystery. Could Mr. West have harmed his wife? This question lingered as evidence pointed towards multiple potential scenarios yet remained inconclusive overall. Jeffrey's neighbors, friends and relatives described the couple as happy and thriving. He was aware of his wife's unique online activities, but saw them as harmless fun. Jeffrey denied ever being violent towards his wife, stating he loved her too much to hurt her. Nonetheless, arguments had become a frequent occurrence in their household. A particularly telling text exchange dated January 12th was found on their phones where the couple argued heatedly. Kat criticized Jeffrey for not matching her in vivacity and temperament, even suggesting they might be incompatible. Despite this, Jeffrey remained the prime suspect with forensic evidence and gathered details only indirectly implying his guilt. Following his arrest, not only his parents but also his daughter and in-laws rallied in his defense. They were firmly convinced of his innocence and asserted he could never harm his wife. After Jeffrey West's arrest, he couldn't afford the $500,000 bail set for him, which meant he had to stay in custody until his trial, a wait stretching almost 3 years. He was offered a plea deal admitting guilt in his wife's demise in exchange for a reduced sentence. However, Jeffrey adamantly refused, maintaining his innocence. The trial commenced in November 2020 and attracted significant media attention, partly due to Kat's online notoriety. This publicity put considerable pressure on the judges and jurors. The possibility of third-party involvement that fateful night was no longer considered. The prosecution argued that all evidence pointed to Mr. West. They believed that in a fit of jealousy and under the influence of alcohol, he struck his wife with a bottle, causing fatal injuries. In a panic, they suggested he staged the scene to mimic an accident by removing evidence from inside the house. Jeffrey's defense team contended that Kat's death was indeed accidental, citing her extremely high blood alcohol levels as factors affecting her balance and coordination. In heartfelt testimony, Kat's mother supported her son-in-law, describing her daughter as eccentric, but insisted Jeffrey loved her unconditionally and would never harm her. She also appealed to the court to consider their granddaughter Lola, who had lost her mother and stood to lose her father too. On January 11, 2021, the jury returned a guilty verdict for involuntary manslaughter. Jeffrey was sentenced to the maximum of 13 years, considering time already served. Notably, if he had accepted the plea deal initially offered, he might have already been free by now. All appeals by Jeffrey and his lawyers have so far been unsuccessful. On July 4, 2009, several faculty members from the finance department of Chinese University gathered to work overtime. They needed to manage and track the school's finances and expenses from the previous semester. Among them was supposed to be 43-year-old Tan Cheng-hui, a faculty member whom many expected to be present. Yet, he was absent. A colleague known as Ma attempted to reach Cheng-hui on his mobile phone at 11 a.m. Unfortunately, there was no answer. Given the heavy workload, Ma couldn't get too concerned and initially wasn't worried. He knew that Cheng-hui's family had recently adopted a stray dog suffering from a skin disease. Cheng-hui had planned to take the dog to the vet, so Ma assumed that's where he might have been. On July 5th, the university's finance department held another meeting, but again Cheng-hui failed to show up. Ma tried calling his mobile phone once more, but still received no response. Not knowing Cheng-hui's landline number prevented further attempts at contact. By July 6th, Cheng-hui hadn't shown up for work for 2 days and had not communicated with any co-workers. Eventually, one colleague reported his absence to the university's finance department. Fortunately, his superiors knew Cheng-hui's house landline number and tried calling it, again with no success. Concerned about his prolonged absence, they reached out to the library where his 33-year-old wife, Tang Anyi, worked. According to library staff, she too was absent without having booked any days off. Originally from Zhongshan, in Guangdong province of mainland China, Cheng-hui and Tang Anyi were married for 11 years and had 2 daughters, 10-year-old Tan Zai and 7-year-old Tan Zai. Both daughters shared the same name. Although their living conditions were modest, they resided in an abandoned recycling station on Waju South Road. The family was described as kind-hearted and cheerful individuals whose children were well-behaved. Cheng-hui frequently took his daughters into town for leisure activities, which led some to speculate that perhaps the family decided on an impromptu vacation, but encountered unforeseen circumstances delaying their return. This unusual situation called for further investigation and warranted greater concern within their academic community. His colleagues spent a significant period repeatedly calling both his mobile and house phone, hoping for a different outcome. After some time, someone did answer. However, it was not a family member. Instead, an unfamiliar man with a middle-aged voice responded. He introduced himself as Cheng-hui's cousin, stating that the family had left for Dongduan in Guangdong province for summer vacation. According to him, Cheng Hui had entrusted his personal phone to him for safekeeping. When asked about the family's return to Hong Kong, the man was vague and eventually hung up after repeated questioning, then turned off the mobile phone. This call only heightened the suspicion and concern among Cheng Hui's co-workers. Cheng Hui had always been diligent and conscientious, never leaving work without a valid reason. If he were to take a vacation with his children, he would have arranged matters with their school beforehand. Additionally, the family cared for 9 stray dogs, raising questions about who would look after them during their trip to mainland China and how they could afford such a vacation. Cheng Hui had lived with his parents. His father was a sailor while his mother worked at a paper mill. His father's mysterious disappearance led to his mother's deteriorating health and eventual move to a nursing home. Cheng Hui regularly visited her weekly, making it out of character for him to suddenly abandon these responsibilities. Consequently, they decided to contact the police. One of his colleagues guided the police to Cheng Hui's residence, located at an abandoned recycling station in Pingqi village. On their way there, they noticed an unexpected event. A short man was seen near the Tan family's fence, but quickly vanished from sight. Initially dismissing this sighting as inconsequential, they proceeded to their destination. Upon reaching Cheng Hui's home gate, they discovered it locked. The police then surveyed the property and began questioning neighbors. The abandoned recycling station spans nearly 450 square meters, with only 90 square meters constructed upon. Around 350 square meters are unoccupied flower beds. The building itself was illegally constructed. The original owner had haphazardly built several tin houses on the premises for waste recycling purposes, while another stone structure functioned as a pig farm. Given that virtually no one resided there, the police found only one neighbor available for questioning, an elderly woman named Wang, who lived alone across the street. Wang mentioned she had resided in the area for quite some time and knew their daily schedules somewhat, particularly that they usually attended to their garden in the afternoons, but beyond this knowledge, she was not privy to details about their personal lives. She noted that, due to the remote location, relatives seldom visited the family. The only acquaintance she knew of was Cheng Hui's middle-aged cousin, who went by Zhu. Wang was not informed of any mentions of suicide. She only knew that Cheng Hui's uncle lived nearby in a stone house. A colleague of Cheng Hui told the police that when he called Cheng Hui's phone, it was answered by his cousin. The police assumed the person on the other end was Zhu. Wang didn't know Zhu's or the uncle's address, but she did hear cries for help from their house on July 5th. Consequently, officers were dispatched to conduct door-to-door inquiries in Pingqi village. Investigators later located a man at a stone house at 74 Huaju Road. He identified himself as 42-year-old Zhu Shenqi and confirmed he was Cheng Hui's cousin. He mentioned that he frequently visited the family home to assist with renovations and garden work. When questioned about the phone call, he insisted that the family was on vacation in China. According to him, Cheng Hui visited his mother at a nursing home on July 5th before returning home and informing him of his plan to travel to Dongguan, China for a few days. To avoid expensive roaming fees for his Hong Kong mobile phone in mainland China, he had asked Zhu Shenqi to keep it until he returned. The person observed by police and Cheng Hui's colleague leaving hurriedly was actually Zhu after feeding the family dogs. Zhu Shenqi appeared calm during his interaction with investigators. There were no notable inconsistencies in his account. When asked if he possessed a key to the family home, he said he did not. Despite locating Zhu Shenqi, police continued their door-to-door investigations. Some villagers claimed that a few days earlier, a stranger had borrowed money from a female villager and later had an intense confrontation where she threatened to collect the debt from Cheng Hui's home if unpaid when his mother was hospitalized since she owed money too. However, this stranger wasn't Zhu Shenqi. Nonetheless, speculation arose suggesting that perhaps the family went into hiding to evade debts and misled their cousin about their whereabouts in China. Or so they thought. When the police asked the villagers about Shenqi, That's when they learned he had lied. The villagers that Shenki regularly visited the area to maintain and work on the home. He always managed to open the gate and door by himself, even when no one else was home. This led the police to conclude that he must have had a key or some kind access to the property. In fact, he did. Wang witnessed Cheng Hui hand over the key to Shenki. This key was left at the university office, with instructions for Shenki to pick it up. Wang also saw this exchange. The police then returned to Shenki's home and asked for the key. Once again, he denied owning one and claimed he used a spare during renovations, which he supposedly returned, leaving him without access. Shenki appeared far less composed compared to his previous questioning sessions. He deliberately avoided key details. So when police threatened to search his home, Shenki panicked and suddenly remembered another house key he hadn't returned. He retrieved it from his dresser and handed it over to the authorities. Despite his suspicious behavior, there wasn't direct evidence linking him to the family's disappearance, so they put him under surveillance while continuing their investigation. Using this spare key, investigators entered the home, which was in complete disarray and had clearly been ransacked. They found several fresh bloodstains on the walls, indicating that someone had likely been killed on the property. In the kitchen, police discovered a sink full of dirty dishes, a clear contradiction to any claim that they had gone to China, as they would not have left their home in such a mess before leaving. Inside the couple's master bedroom, they found family ID cards in a dresser drawer. The head investigator contacted border crossing authorities, who confirmed that no member of the family had left Hong Kong. Continuing their search, they found a blood-stained shirt in a side room and a blood-stained plastic hollow water pipe in a corner of another room. Sniffer dogs were brought in for further clues. The dogs picked up a scent and found blood stains under freshly turned soil 99 meters away from the house. Despite it being summer vacation, it was known that Cyan and Zion, the daughters, had signed up for summer school classes, meaning they wouldn't be on vacation either. It became clear that foul play was involved concerning what happened to this family. Soon after, a dedicated task force was created specifically for investigating this case, but no further investigation took place immediately due to how late it was, so authorities just cordoned off Pingchi village's entrances and exits, while placing Shenki under house arrest as their primary suspect. Shenki soon admitted his actions. He stated he was from Huangpu, Guangdong province. He lived with his sister, wife, and 2 sons, aged 15 and who suffered from memory issues. Shenki previously made a living through motorcycle sales in Junction City. However, the 2006 ban on motorcycles in Guangdong affected his sales and income drastically. Struggling financially, he reached out to his cousin, Tan Changi, in Hong Kong for assistance in finding work there. Shang Hui managed to secure Shenki a construction job that paid a daily salary of 500 Hong Kong dollars with board and lodging included. After working for half a month, Shenki felt frustrated with his pay since company deductions left him with only 220 Hong Kong dollars. Annoyed and dispirited, he quit without notice and went back to China. In 2007, Typhoon Pabuk caused extensive damage to his home. Faced with hefty repair costs, Shenki sought employment help from Cheng Hui in Hong Kong again. This time, Shang Hui couldn't find available jobs but offered to pay Shenki from his own salary if Shenki helped work on Hui's home. Shenki accepted the offer. Under this deal, every other month, Shenki would travel to Hong Kong for various tasks around the household like gardening and repairs. As per Shenki's account, an affair began between him and Cheng Hui's wife during this period. On July 3rd, Cheng Hui discovered the affair. On July 5th, while visiting a nursing home with Cheng Hui's wife to see her mother-in-law, Shenki snuck back home to continue the affair. Cheng Hui unexpectedly returned early and furiously confronted him. According to Shenki, seeing murderous intent in Cheng Hui's eyes drove him to desperation. He grabbed a 25-centimeter fruit knife and fatally stabbed Cheng Hui repeatedly until he fell into a pool of blood. Shenki was understandably frightened by what had just occurred and intended to report it to the authorities. Nevertheless, Shanky mentioned he couldn't allow that to transpire, so since he couldn't convince Cheng Hui's wife, he resolved to eliminate her as well. He located some wires in the room's corner, rushed at her, knocked her down, bound her hands behind her back, her mouth and nose with tape, and a plastic bag over her head. Meanwhile, their 2 children were in a bedroom watching cartoons. She screamed for them to flee, but instead, they ran towards their mother and found their father deceased and Shanky in the process of killing their mother. They retreated to their room, crying and locking the door. Given she was already restrained, Shanky left Cheng Hui's wife momentarily and pursued the children. Their cries were overheard by a neighbor. Using a pair of pliers, Shanky forced open the door and tied their hands behind their backs with wires too, taped over their mouths and noses, and covered their heads with plastic bags as well. Returning to Cheng Hui's wife after securing the children, who also soon suffocated, he found she had finally stopped breathing. After killing the entire family, Shanky was uncertain about his next steps. He went back home to ponder his options. Shanky considered that hiding the bodies in a ditch or water might make them too easily discoverable, and that dismembering them would be very taxing and time-consuming. He decided on burying them on their own property instead. On July 6th, Shanky returned to the house intending to clean up as many bloodstains as possible before digging a hole deep and wide enough for 4 bodies. He quickly placed all 4 family members inside it, along with the murder tools. Sharp knife, water pipe, iron pliers, then covered it all up. The police were skeptical about his motives but believed his account overall. They escorted Shanky back to the scene where he identified for them where he'd buried everything used for committing these crimes. On July 7th, they contacted the fire department for assistance with exhuming the remains. The firefighters arrived equipped with excavation tools and wore gas masks since the bodies were near a septic tank. They commenced digging but soon encountered an issue. They hit cement. Shanky, during his confession, omitted a key detail. He had filled the pit with cement before covering it back up. The thickness of the cement was unknown, and it had hardened, rendering their tools ineffective in breaking through. Consequently, the police brought in a private engineering company. This company utilized high-grade tools to begin drilling through the concrete. However, the engineering team had weak stomachs. Upon drilling through and discovering human hair, they lost their nerve and refused to continue, as they did not wish to see a dead body. The police took 13 hours to convince them to proceed. Once fully excavated, they found the pit measured 2.54 meters wide and 6 feet deep. At the bottom lay the 4 bodies of the family members, barefoot and clad in just t-shirts and shorts. Cheng Hui's body was at the very bottom, with his hands and feet bound by electric wire and multiple stab wounds on his abdomen, back and neck. His clothes were stained with blood. And Enzio's knees, hands, and feet were also tied up with electric wire. A wire was wrapped around her neck, while her mouth and nose were sealed with yellow tape. Zion's mouth and nose were covered with tape, her hands and feet were bound, her face appeared distorted. Similarly, Xiaowang's face was contorted, her hands and feet were tied up, her mouth and nose sealed, her eyes were covered with transparent tape. Both Enzio and Enzio displayed no overt signs of trauma, leading police to believe they might have been buried alive. Shanky was formally arrested and during interrogation altered his confession. He retracted his initial claim about an affair but admitted attempting to initiate one. And Enzio felt uncomfortable and informed Cheng Hui about Shanky's behavior. Enraged, Cheng Hui expelled Shanky from their home and prohibited him from returning. Subsequently, Shanky revisited the home to apologize, surprisingly receiving Cheng Hui's forgiveness. On July 3rd, Shanky resumed work at their home when it appeared that their relationship had mended until July 4th, when he again made advances towards an Enzio during Cheng Hui's absence. Attempting to escalate this time by trying to molest an author, an Enzio led her to flee and call for help as she locked herself in a room for safety, to avoid alarming neighbors. In response, and likely panic, Shanky fled the scene in anger. On July 5th, Shanky waited for Cheng Hui to visit his mother at the nursing home. His intention was to force his way into the family home once more, under the pretense of delivering a second apology. Cheng Hui, anticipating such an attempt, wisely returned home early. Upon arrival, he found Shanky on the property, attempting to gain entry to speak with Enzio again. This encounter quickly escalated into an argument. In a heated, Shanky stabbed Cheng Hui, not in self-defense but voluntarily. The remainder of Shanky's confession aligned with his initial statements, but included the added detail of filling the makeshift grave with cement. Yet, after the bodies were examined during autopsy, it became evident that Shanky's accounts were incomplete. Cheng Hui's murder was far more savage than described. He had sustained 9 stab wounds to his head and neck, and nearly 80 on his body. Additionally, there were 10 stab wounds on his hands and feet. Rather than being suffocated with a plastic bag as initially claimed, both Cheng Hui and Zion had been strangled. Forensic analysis of the home revealed that none of the cutlery or dishes held the family's DNA. Instead, they bore only Shanky's DNA. It was concluded that Cheng Hui had not been murdered in the kitchen but likely elsewhere in the house. Enzio did not become aware of these events until she herself was attacked by Shanky next. Furthermore, the weapon used was not from the family's kitchen but one belonging to Shanky himself. The cement used for concealing the bodies had been purchased ahead of time, indicating forethought and planning. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Enzio's bank cards had been used at ATMs following her death. However, failed attempts to guess her PIN prevented any money from being withdrawn. Moreover, their cash and bank cards were discovered missing, pointing towards robbery as a motive and solidifying premeditation. Throughout this process, whenever discrepancies in his story were highlighted by police officers, Shanky swiftly provided new versions of events. He explained that urgent repairs were needed for his ancestral home in China, amounting to $100,000 in cash, while maintaining financial support for 2 children still at school there as well, both which necessitated significant funds. Because he lacked local favorability back home, it meant borrowing money would likely be denied, and visits previously made to Hong Kong hadn't yielded substantial earnings either. Hence, ultimately turning towards seeking assistance from Cheng Hui seemed like necessary recourse under such pressing circumstances, according to him. Shanky harbored the belief that Cheng Mi was far wealthier than he seemed and was exploited for cheap labor. On July 3rd, Shanky returned to Hong Kong without informing anyone. He waited until July 5th, when the couple didn't have to work. Concealing a knife, Shanky knocked on the door while Cheng Hui was away at the nursing home. They talked briefly. When Cheng Hui returned and saw Shanky, he asked if there was anything he needed. As they conversed, Annie went to the kitchen. Almost immediately, Shanky asked to borrow 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. Cheng Hui declined because, although he had the money, and even more, he needed it for his mother's treatment and daughter's education. Shanky refused to believe him and accused him of exploiting him for cheap labor. This accusation angered Cheng Hui, who then ordered Shanky to leave. As Cheng Hui turned his back, Shanky attacked him, covering his mouth before stabbing him from behind. He then restrained a terrified Ani and Jiang Wang, searched the home for cash and bank cards, and demanded their passwords. Although Cheng Hui provided a fake password, at that moment, Shanky didn't realize it. Despite this lie about strangling Annie and claiming he killed them by putting tape over their mouths and noses, as well as using plastic bags over their heads, this part being untrue, when Shanky left for the nearest ATM, he found out he had been lied to when the PIN number didn't work. Upon his return home, he discovered they had all suffocated in his absence. Noticing the food Ani had been preparing, he decided to eat it near the 4 corpses while contemplating how to dispose of them. After stealing 6,000 Hong Kong dollars from Cheng Hui's person, he buried the bodies and tools in a small pit before retiring to sleep at his temporary residence. The next morning, he awoke with the grim realization that the bodies might be detected due to the smell seeping from the soil. So he decided to buy cement from a store. After returning home, he dug up the pit he had previously made and poured in the cement before refilling the hole again. He planned to stay at the house for a while to answer calls to Cheng Hui's cell phone or house phone, pretending that he was asked to look after things while they were supposedly on vacation. Shanky mentioned he did not anticipate his deception being uncovered so quickly. Even now, Shanky continued lying about various details, such as claiming he bought the cement before the murder and fabricating causes of Annie and Jiang's deaths. The police, by this point, were no longer interested in extracting a truthful confession, since they felt they had sufficient evidence to proceed. The trial took place at the Hong Kong High Court on October 28, 2010. Shanky pleaded not guilty. Maintaining his earlier story about an affair with Annie, he asserted that Cheng Hui was killed in self-defense and claimed Annie and Jiang died accidentally. According to him, he only confessed to extorting the family and killing them for financial reasons because he was coerced by police through beatings and suffocation until he surrendered the confession they wanted. On November 23rd, the jury delivered their verdict, unanimously finding him guilty of murdering Cheng Hui while acquitting him of Jiang's murder but convicting him of manslaughter instead. On this charge, the jury split 5-2. This distinction proved inconsequential because Shanky received a life sentence for 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter. The presiding judge condemned Shanky's lack of conscience, calling him worse than a beast and unrepentant. He accused Shanky of concocting both his self-defense tale and affair with Annie solely to tarnish their reputations posthumously, rather than secure a reduced sentence. Interestingly, despite widespread condemnation, Shanky's family sided with him. They accused Cheng Hui of being hypocritical, a true villain who exploited Shanky financially by pocketing his earnings and using him for cheap labor. These claims sparked outrage among Pingqi village residents, leading Shanky's family to move back to China to escape backlash. This crime was among Hong Kong's most shocking incidents. It spurred an outpouring of support toward Cheng Hui's family, as many visited their home offering condolences, while netizens raised ample funds for funeral expenses. The family's 9 stray dogs also found new homes when another family adopted them, each year on July 5th. They would take these dogs for walks near their former owner's residence in Pingqi village as tribute. On August 9, 2022, at age 55, Shanky passed away in Hong Kong's Stanley Prison due to liver cancer.
In the summer of 2003, the body of 36-year-old Sabrina Payne was found in a field near Tremont, Illinois. Sabrina was a black female who was known to support a drug habit with prostitution. Sabrina had last been seen at her home 2 days before her body was found. The original autopsy failed to determine a cause of death, leaving some of the detectives to believe she overdosed. One detective, however, felt uneasy about that assumption. His suspicions were confirmed as more bodies were found in Peoria and Tazewell counties over the next year. On February 5, 2004, the body of 36-year-old Barbara Williams was found in a ditch near Edwards, Illinois. She was found partially clothed and lying face down in the snow. She had been seen alive between 9 and 10 p.m. the night before. An autopsy showed that she had multiple contusions and abrasions on her body. Toxicology showed that she had fatal levels of cocaine in her blood. At this point, police were not ready to call this a murder or entertain the idea of a serial killer preying on black drug-addicted prostitutes. In October of 2004, 32-year-old Shakonda Thomas was reported missing. She had last been seen by her family in August. Shakonda was known to disappear at times, but when she didn't come back after several weeks, her family reported her missing. Shirley Ann Trapp was also reported missing in the late summer of 2004. She was seen 3 days before she was reported missing. Tamara Wells was reported missing in September of 2004 after not being seen for 3 weeks. All 3 missing women were also black females known to support a crack cocaine habit with prostitution. 36-year-old mother of 8, Laura Lawler, disappeared from her home after leaving with a man and woman. Her longtime partner searched for her but only was able to determine she had been with a man named Larry. Her boyfriend, and father to her 7 daughters and 1 son, describes Laura as the love of his life and a beautiful soul. The two had experimented with crack cocaine, and Laura seemed to struggle with addiction before her disappearance. On September 25, 2004, Linda Neal was found on King Road in Tazewell County. She was found nude along the side of the road. Linda, like the other women, was known to be part of the drug scene in Peoria. At this point, police had determined there was likely a serial killer stalking black females in the Peoria area. A task force was formed, which one detective states would have occurred much quicker if the victims had been white females. While police desperately searched for the killer, they kept a close eye on women in the community at risk. Despite their efforts, on October 15, 2004, Brenda Irving's body was found in a ditch near Farmington. Brenda was found nude, and an autopsy determined that she had been strangled and suffered blunt force trauma to her head. She also had fatal levels of cocaine in her system at the time of her death. Her children had feared for their mother's safety, as she had known many of the women who had been killed or disappeared from central Illinois. Brenda struggled with drug addiction. Despite detectives' best efforts, the case proved difficult to solve. They followed thousands of leads, but finally got the lead they were waiting for in December of 2004. 35-year-old Vicki Bomer was arrested for theft. From jail, she told authorities that she thought she could help them find the serial killer preying on her fellow sex workers. She believed that a man who had picked her up in July 2004 was responsible. Bomer explained that in July, a man named Larry Bright lured her to his mother's home where they shared alcohol and drugs. Once she was intoxicated, she said Bright attacked her, attempted to rape her, and pulled a knife on her. Somehow, Bomer was able to escape. Police were at first skeptical, as Bomer asked for a plea deal in exchange for her testimony. Why hadn't she reported this back in July? Why wait until she was under arrest? Vicki Bomer claimed she was scared of being arrested for outstanding warrants, which is why she did not come forward in July 2004. A search of her criminal history confirmed the warrants, so detectives decided to take a look at the man named Larry Bright. Larry Dean Bright was born in Peoria, Illinois, on July 8, 1966. He served a 2-year stint in prison at age 19 for burglary and carjacking. According to Larry's family, the time Larry spent in prison changed him for the worse. Larry became more angry and violent and began using drugs. Larry had an injury, which started an addiction to prescription opioids and later crack cocaine. He also developed an addiction to pornography, preferring videos with black women. Larry lived with his mother in a tiny guest house behind her home. Larry enjoyed gardening, creating a beautiful garden bed of flowers for his mother. When the police arrived at Larry's home following the tip, they noticed the beautiful flowers in the garden. Larry was placed under arrest for the unlawful restraint of Vicki. They questioned Larry about the murders, but he denied having any information about the murdered and missing women. Throughout the interview, Larry smoked several cigarettes. Detectives planned to take one of the cigarette butts and test it for DNA, but Larry ate them before leaving the interrogation room. Larry declined to give DNA voluntarily. Police searched Larry Bright's home on January 20, 2005. The investigators dug up the garden, finding several small bone fragments and ashes that were later determined to be human. When the police questioned Larry again, they told him they were digging up his mother's flowers. At this point, Larry broke down and confessed to multiple murders. He even led investigators to the remains of some of his victims. Larry explained that around July 27, 2003, he picked up Sabrina Payne on the south side of Peoria. He drove her to his home, which he shared with his mother. He claimed the two drank and used cocaine before having consensual sex. Larry said he did not intend to kill Sabrina, but he became enraged, thinking Sabrina was trying to rip him off. He strangled her to death and dumped her body near the cornfield where she was found. Larry confessed to picking up Barbara Williams in February 2004. Again, he used drugs and alcohol with his victim. He stated that he once again lost control of his anger and killed Barbara. He claimed he caught Barbara stealing from him. He dumped her body along the road where she was found the next day. The prosecution believed that after the first two murders, Larry developed a bloodlust. At the time of his arrest, he said, "I knew them I would kill the others I would pick up. I went out hunting." Larry also confessed to killing Laura Lauer. He burned her body in his backyard burn pit, burying their remains in his mother's yard. He said he wanted to destroy the bodies to avoid getting caught. He confessed to killing tomato walls and burning her remains. Her jawbone was found in the backyard. He admitted to strangling, beating, and burning Shirley in trap. Shakanda Thomas had the same fate after being picked up by Larry Bright. He burned the woman and buried the ashes in the yard. Because of his attempts to cremate his victims, he was nicknamed the Bone Crusher. Larry said that he attempted to burn Linda Neal and Brenna Irving as well, but the attempts were unsuccessful due to the weather. He dumped both women along the side of the road. Larry was facing the death penalty following his January 2005 arrest. In an attempt to spare his mother the embarrassment of a trial and avoid the death penalty, Larry Bright pleaded guilty to 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of drug-induced homicide on May 30, 2006. Bright's murders were not considered racially motivated, but detectives believe he was just attracted to black women. He is one of the very few serial killers who chooses victims outside of his race. Larry was sentenced to 7 life sentences without the possibility of parole, to be served concurrently. He was also given an additional 30 years for the drug-induced homicide. As part of the plea deal, Larry will be required to serve 100% of his sentence with no parole consideration. Larry is currently housed at the Shawnee Correctional Center in Vienna, Illinois. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars, but that brings little peace to the families of his victims. The loved ones of Larry's victims want people to know that the women he killed were more than just drug addicts or prostitutes. They were people. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. The serial killer dentist of St. Louis, Clennon Engelman. Dr. Clennon Engelman was born on February 6, 1927, in St. Louis, Missouri. Dr. Engelman grew up on the south side of the city and felt a deep connection to his neighborhood. After serving in the military, Dr. Engelman used his GI Bill to go to Washington University and become a dentist. He opened his dental office on the south side of St. Louis, serving the community he had always loved. Dr. Engelman, who went by Clen, was married to a woman named Edna Ruth, but they divorced in 1956. By 1958, both Clen and Ruth had remarried. Clen was operating his dental office and appeared to be successfully serving the St. Louis community. On December 17, 1958, citizens in Forest Park noticed a bloodied man stumbling. The man, James Stanley Bullock, soon passed from his injuries. These injuries were caused by a gunshot. No one could figure out why someone would shoot 28-year-old James Bullock. James Bullock was born on April 17, 1931, in DeSoto. He was raised in Shiloh, Illinois, by his grandparents and later his aunt after his parents passed away. According to an article from 1938, the then 7-year-old was living with his grandparents in 1938 and enjoyed attending school and fishing. James later served in the military before returning to St. Louis to work and go to college. Back in St. Louis, James met Edna Ruth, the ex-wife of Dr. Clen Engelman. The two married, and 6 short months later, James was dead. An employee at a local sanitarium initially claimed James was there 4 days before his murder, asking to be admitted because he feared for his life. His wife and aunt said this was not true, as the three had dinner together on that night. According to his widow and aunt, James was not afraid for his life, and they knew no one who would want him dead. However, Edna Ruth benefited greatly from her husband's death. Ruth had life insurance policies totaling $64,088. While under questioning, Edna Ruth made several weird statements, including telling the police she was married before, but her husband did not know. Who was she married to? Her husband's dentist, Dr. Clen Engelman. Edna Ruth had lied to James and his family and lied on the marriage application about being married before. Police questioned a local career criminal who was out on parole for an assault at the time of the shooting. They weren't able to tie him to the murder of James, but they did note he lived near Dr. Engelman's office. Dr. Engelman and Edna Ruth both refused to take a polygraph test and denied any involvement in the murder of James Bullock. Dr. Engelman's new wife, Ida, refused to be questioned by the police. A patient provided an alibi for Dr. Engelman. However, another witness said that they tried to find someone at the office around the time and the office was empty. Edna Ruth invested part of the funds she received after becoming a widow into doctor. Been bored being a dentist, so he often ventured into other areas of business. This included buying a trike strip along with a partner, Eric Fry, Dr. Engelman had grown to be close friends with Eric and his wife Sandy. On September 26, 1963, Eric and Dr. Engelman were at the drag strip using dynamite to explode and then fill abandoned cisterns on the property. Eric was lying on his stomach near one of the cisterns when the dynamite exploded quicker than anticipated. Eric was killed instantly and found lying in the bottom of the cistern. Coroner H.D. Steinbeck ruled the death accidental. Mr. Frey's wife had an insurance policy on her husband, which she invested part of into Dr. Engelman's practice. Dr. Engelman divorced Ida and married his third wife, Ruth, in 1967. The couple shared a son, but Ruth hated the close relationship her husband had with a young woman who worked in his office named Carmen Miranda. Dr. Engelman offered to train Carmen to be a dental assistant in his office. Edna felt uncomfortable with the flirting between the doctor and his young assistant. Dr. Engelman, however, claimed he was trying to help people in his community. He hired Carmen's brother, Nick, as well at one point. Ruth was relieved when Carmen met a married man named Peter Holm. Just a few months later, however, Carmen and Eric were walking in a rural area in Pacific, Missouri. The couple were exploring an area known to have caves and scenic paths. A shot suddenly fired, hitting Peter in the head. Peter died instantly, and a hysterically Carmen flagged down the help. Nearby, police found an X on a tree made with tape. The area was familiar to locals as a hunting area, and police believed that the shot was accidental. Police believe someone was target shooting at the X and accidentally struck Mr. Holm. Carmen had a significant amount of life insurance on her husband, totaling $60,000. This is equivalent to around $300,000 in 2024. Dr. Engelman and Ruth divorced soon after, at which time Dr. Engelman married young Carmen, whom he had known since she was a small child. His son lived with Edna, his ex-wife. Despite being married to Carmen, Dr. Engelman and Ruth still met regularly for sex. Dr. Engelman constantly had extramarital affairs, which included previous affairs with Carmen, Ruth, and even Sandy Fry, the wife of his business associate Eric Fry, who was killed by dynamite. Another of Dr. Engelman's affairs was with a patient named Barbara Boyle. On November 3, 1977, someone pretending to be from the farm girl walked up to the farmhouse owned by Arthur and Vernita Guswell in Everettsville, Illinois. Soon after entering the home, the elderly couple were attacked and both were shot in the head. The wealthy couple left $340,000 to their son, Ronald Guswell. Guess who Ronald Guswell was married to? Barbara Boyle. On April 4, 1979, less than 2 years after the murder of his parents, Ronald Guswell was found dead inside his car outside a hotel in East St. Louis, Illinois. The man had been beaten and shot to death. He had been missing for 4 days when his body was found. Following her husband's murder, Barbara collected his inheritance in addition to several life insurance policies. The equivalent sum of money today would be nearly $1.7 million. Guess who she cut to? Dr. Glenn Engelman. Following the murder of Ronald Guswell, authorities were starting to notice the trend of connected deaths to Dr. Engelman. His patients and community, however, only saw a generous man committed to helping his community and its citizens. Dr. Engelman was not the greatest dentist, however. He often did a sloppy job of making casts for dentures and dental appliances, requiring the work to have to be redone by the dental lab several times. His business was struggling, however, and he soon found himself in debt with the dental lab owned by Sophie Barrera. Sophie Barrera owned a South St. Louis dental laboratory and had grown tired of waiting for Dr. Engelman to pay up by 1980. She filed a lawsuit against the doctor that was set to go to court just a few days after Sophie was murdered. On January 14, 1980, Sophie entered her vehicle in South St. Louis. Shortly after, the vehicle exploded. Police found remnants of a bomb under her charred vehicle. Sophie had told her son before she was in fear of being killed. She believed Dr. Glenn Engelman was dangerous. Dr. Engelman was questioned for 3 hours and then released. Police were certain he was responsible for Sophie's death, but they had to prove it. The public also wondered if the bombing was related to another bombing in the area that was carried out between two mob families fighting for control over St. Louis's labor unions. The evidence indicated, however, that this was not a mob hit. The number one suspect was the man who owed Sophie $15,000. Dr. Engelman had to be stopped, but the police weren't sure how to do it. Detectives soon began having conversations with Dr. Engelman's ex-wife and mother of his son, Ruth. Ruth told police nothing at first, but eventually started to talk. She explained that Dr. Engelman often bragged about killing people. He told her that he had a superpower. He was able to kill without remorse. He had admitted to killing Eric Fry, Peter Holm, and the Kuswell family. It was his side hustle, killing for profit. Ruth agreed to help the police, but none of her testimony could be used in court because Dr. Engelman confessed to her while the two were still married. He was protected by spousal privilege. Ruth decided to wear a wire, however, and met up with Dr. Engelman to exchange their son and sometimes just to socialize. They were still having a sexual relationship despite Dr. Engelman's marriage to Carmen. She tried to get Dr. Engelman to confess to her again by asking direct questions. He didn't seem to take the bait at first, and Ruth feared he would kill her next. Ruth suggested police plant a bug in her bedroom and she would invite the dentist over for sex. Dr. Engelman was suspicious, however, and did not say anything that could lead to his arrest. Ruth then met him at a diner wearing a wire, and this time he commented on being homicidally intimate with the widow of one of his victims. He admitted to the murders in great detail, providing just what police needed for an arrest. He explained that he found murder more sexually satisfying than sex. His ex-wife was given a new life in the witness protection program. Carmen, who was no longer married to the dentist, and her brother Nick were brought in for questioning to corroborate the allegations against Dr. Engelman. As possible co-conspirators, they asked for and were granted immunity to testify against the dentist. Carmen told quite the story. She said she was working for the dentist when he suggested she find someone with good benefits to marry. He told her about Eric Fry, whom he said he directed Sandy Fry to marry with all intentions of murdering the insurance proceeds. Soon after she was married, Carmen said Dr. Engelman told her where to go and made sure her husband was shot and killed. He staged it to look like a target shooting accident. Clennon Engelman was finally arrested and charged with murder in 1980. Carmen testified at Dr. Engelman's first trial, for which he was convicted of murdering Peter Holm and given 50 years in prison. The dentist then pled guilty to the murder of Sophie Barrera to avoid the death penalty. Serving a life sentence for that murder in Missouri, Dr. Engelman was back in clerk by 1985 in Illinois. In 1984, Robert Handy, a contact and acquaintance of Dr. Engelman, admitted to authorities that he had taken part in the murder conspiracy of the Kuswell family. He implicated Dr. Engelman, who had bludgeoned Ronald Kuswell and shot him, as well as Ronald's widow, Barbara Boyle. Dr. Engelman was given 3 life sentences for the Kuswell murders. He also was convicted of federal mail fraud and given a 30-year federal sentence. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, including conspiring with his first wife to kill her husband, James Bullock, in 1958. Edna Ruth was never charged in the case due to lack of evidence. Barbara Boyle went on trial for the murder of her in-laws, Arthur and Vernita Kuswell, and husband Ronald in 1985. The jury acquitted her of the murders of Arthur and Vernita but convicted her of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Ronald Kuswell. Barbara Boyle was sentenced to 50 years in prison in 1985. She was granted parole in 2009. Dr. Engelman enjoyed his notoriety in Missouri, often comparing himself to legendary outlaw Jesse James. He is believed to have killed at least 12 people, but the actual number is unknown. Unlike other serial killers, Dr. Engelman was inspired, at least in part, by greed. He also seemed to revel in his ability to not feel remorse. Dr. Engelman died of diabetes-related health issues in 1999 at age 72. He was incarcerated in Jefferson City at the time.